Okay, thank you. Thank you, councillors. Welcome to the council meeting this evening. May I also extend a warm welcome to members of the public who are watching our webcast. I remind all members to turn your cameras and microphone off if you haven't done so already. I'd like now to move to the Civic Mayor's announcements. It is with deep regret that I announce the recent passing of Councillor Geoffrey Watt and former Councillor David Elderton. I'm sure you will join me in expressing our sincere condolences to both Geoffrey and David's families and friends. Both David and Geoffrey were extremely hard-working and well-regarded councillors. Geoffrey was my predecessor as Mayor of Wirral in 2018 and 19. He was a true gentleman who offered me invaluable support and help as Deputy Mayor during 2018 and 19. Their presence will be sorely missed by all councillors and officers. I'm sure you'll all join me in expressing our sincere condolences once again to both Geoffrey and David's family and friends. And I now would ask members and officers to join me for a minute's silence in memory of Geoffrey and David. 1 minute silence, please. Thank you, members and officers. I would like to invite Councillor Mara McLaughlin to say some words in respect to former Councillor Bill Davies, who has recently resigned from the council. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would like to add the condolences of the independent group to those of others following the very sad news of the deaths of Councillor Jeff Watt and former Councillor David Elderton. They were both absolute gentlemen and they will be very sadly missed. But there are times when this council puts aside party political interest to recognise particularly significant events, and this is one of those occasions. A couple of weeks ago, Bill Davies resigned as the councillor for Rock Ferry Ward after giving this borough and its residents 34 years of service. He's done that because for the time being, he needs to concentrate on his health, but I don't think we can let him go from our company without paying tribute to his outstanding service. Whenever Bill's name is mentioned, it's always followed by comments about what a genuinely lovely man he is and how helpful and friendly he is, particularly to new councillors, irrespective of what party they're from. Bill has a lifelong commitment to making the world a fairer place for those who have the least. And from his days as a union steward at his workplace through to his 34 years of service on this council, he's never wavered from that. He developed an absolute expertise on licensing, which he chaired for many years, and I know that the supporting officers there will miss him very much. However, Bill's real strength has been as a ward councillor for Rock Ferry. He knows and understands Rock Ferry better than anyone I know. He was born and raised in the area, the youngest of 12 children, and he seems to know everybody there. When you walk around the ward with him, you can't go more than a few yards without meeting someone who knows him, and actually most likely they'll be related to him. And we used to tease him that his big majority was made up of people he was related to. But everyone likes him. Everyone appreciates his warmth and friendliness. Bill, Chris and I have been together as a team for 24 years, and though I stand to be corrected, I think we were the longest serving team on the council, and I will miss that team more than I can say. But Bill will be missed, I know, by every one of us. and as he now takes on the fight for his health, he does that with our thanks, our respect, our sincere friendship and our affection. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
Okay, I would now like to hand over to Phil McCourt, the monitoring officer. Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before we turn to the business of the meeting, members, I need to undertake a roll call of members. The purpose of this is to ask you to turn on your camera and introduce yourself for the benefit of people watching the webcast, and then to speak clearly into your microphones. And having finished, please turn your camera and microphone off. Councillor Anderson.
Here.
Councillor Bruce Berry.
Councillor Bruce Berry, yes, here.
Councillor Bird.
I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Brame.
Councillor Alan Brame for Oxton, thank you.
Councillor Burgess Joyce.
Here, good evening, thank you.
Councillor Cameron.
Helen Cameron, present.
Councillor Cannon.
Councillor Cannon, present.
Councillor Carubia.
Councillor Chris Carubia from Easton, present, thank you.
Councillor Muspratt.
Councillor Muspratt, Bevington, present.
Councillor Cleary.
Pat Cleary in attendance.
Councillor Clements.
Councillor Wendy Clements here.
Councillor Collins.
Councillor Mike Collins, present.
Councillor Cook.
Councillor Cook, present.
Councillor Corkill.
Andy Corkill, present.
Councillor Cottier.
Yes, Tony Cottier, Bevington, present. Good evening.
Councillor Cox.
Hello, in attendance.
Councillor Quilly. Councillor George Davies.
Councillor George Davis, here.
Councillor Fowkes.
Councillor Steve Fowkes, present.
Councillor Gardner.
Councillor Andrew Gardner, present.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Good evening, Councillor Phil Gilchrist, present.
Councillor Carl Greeny.
Present, good evening.
Councillor Jeff Green.
Councillor Jeff Green, good evening, present.
Councillor Gray.
Councillor Gray, present.
Councillor Hayes.
Paul Hayes, present.
Councillor Steve Hayes.
Councillor Steve Hayes, present, thank you.
Councillor Cathy Hodson.
Councillor Cathy Hodson, present.
Councillor Andrew Hodson. Sorry, Councillor, I got you the wrong way around.
It's all right, I'm present, but we have to share the computer, otherwise we have back feed.
Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Jenny Johnson, present, thank you.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
Councillor Adrian Jones, present.
Councillor Christine Jones.
Councillor Chris Jones, present.
Councillor Sharon Jones.
Councillor Sharon Jones, present.
Councillor Tony Jones.
Councillor Tony Jones, present.
Councillor Jordan.
Councillor Mary Jordan, present.
Councillor Kelly.
Councillor Stuart Kelly, present.
Councillor Kenny.
Councillor Brian Kenny, present. Thank you.
Councillor Leach.
Councillor Anita Leach, present.
Councillor Lewis.
Councillor Ian Lewis, Wallasey, present.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Councillor Moira McLaughlin, Rockferry, present.
Councillor McManus.
Councillor Julie McManus, Whitson St James, present.
Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Dave Mitchell, Eastern Ward, present.
Councillor Nolan.
Councillor Yvonne Nolan, Rockferry Ward, present.
Councillor Norbury.
Councillor Tony Norbury, Prenton Ward, present.
Councillor Povell.
Councillor Cherry Povell, present.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Leslie Rennie, Wallasey Ward, present.
Councillor Robinson. Councillor Jean Robinson. Is your system working? No. Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Les Rowlands, Heswell Ward, present.
Councillor Frost.
Councillor Sam Frost, Prenton, present.
Thank you, members. And Councillor Jean Robinson, I've got you on the system, but not able to hear you. Are you able to try again?
Councillor Robinson has just sent a message saying that she's having a problem with sound.
Councillor Robinson, you may need to log out and reboot. Thank you, members. Is there anybody I've missed?
Councillor Tony Smith.
Half the councillors.
Mike Sullivan.
Me.
Mike Sullivan, missed. No.
Councillor Jean Stapleton, present.
Thank you.
Mike Sullivan, present.
Sarah Spore,
Alison Wright, present.
Councillor Joe Walsh, present.
Thank you, members. I've got
Stuart
another
Wisconsin, present.
Williams, Councillor Jerry Williams, present.
Councillor Irene
Councillor-
Williams, present.
Councillor Jill Wood, present.
Councillor Steve Williams, Moulton Western Sorghum, Massey, present.
Councillor Stuart
Upton, present. Sorry.
And Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright, present.
Thank you. I think, members, that's it.
Chair, present.
Councillor Paul Stewart, Seacombe Ward, present.
Councillor Jeanette Williamson, Liscard Ward, present.
Thank you, members. Anyone else? No.
Just to confirm, you got Councillor Joe Walsh. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Members, the next item falls to myself to introduce, as this is a most unusual annual meeting, given the times we're in. So may I please have nominations for the Civic Mayor of the Metropolitan Borough of Wirral for the municipal year, remainder of the municipal year 2021.
Mr McCourt, if it's in order, I wish to propose that Councillor Tony Smith be installed as Mayor, again for the remainder of the municipal year. None of us could imagine the events that would have overtaken him in this year. He's undertaken to serve Wirral and is willing to carry on through these difficult times. He's well placed and widely respected, and I and many members will look forward to him being able to serve Wirral through the rest of this municipal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Do you have a seconder?
Happy to second that, Phil.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. I will take this vote by assent. If any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat? I'll give 20 seconds or so for any technology to catch up. Thank you, members. That's agreed. Mr. Mayor, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much to all the members. It is unprecedented times. It's extremely something that we wouldn't have expected last May when I was appointed mayor. I will certainly continue to do my best for the authority and to serve all members as best I can. If there's any way that I can support members during the next 6 months or so, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. So thank you very much for asking me to continue for another 6 months. Thank you. Right, the next business of the meeting is the election of Deputy Civic Mayor for 2020 to 2021. Can I have nominations for the position of Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to nominate Councillor George Davis. As Councillor Gilchrist has just said previously, these are unprecedented times and it's a very unusual year for us. Be nice to nominate George Davis for to assume his being mayor next May. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeanette. Can I have a seconder, please, for that motion? Nominations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second that nomination, and I'm delighted to do so. George Davis has been a councillor for a very long time, and I think he'll make it an excellent mayor in the coming years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Leach. Take this vote by assent. So if any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? Can everyone hear me at the moment? Yes?
Can now, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I was just worried in case perhaps some people just seem to be someone saying they couldn't hear me at the moment. Okay, if we move on to the next item, which is declarations of interest. Members are asked to consider whether you have any disclosable pecuniary or any other relevant interest in connection with any matters to be determined at this meeting, and if so, to declare it and state the nature of such interest. Can I remind members that if you have a personal and prejudicial interest and need to leave the virtual meeting room, you are asked to hang up from the meeting, stay by your computer, and officers will call you back into the meeting at the conclusion of the item that you had an interest in. I've also been asked to remind members that item 6F, members' allowances, is not a disclosable interest. Council must agree this item and it is therefore exempt from requirements on pecuniary interests. Can members please indicate now if they have any interest they wish to declare? No? Okay, if we just move on now to item 5. We've already done the Civic Mayor's announcements, so I'll move on to item 5, pages 1 to 8. So turning to item 5, we are asked to approve the minutes of the council meetings held on the 16th of March and the 20th of July 2020 on pages 1 to 8 of the agenda pack. I will move approval of these minutes as a correct record. Do I have a seconder, please?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. I will take this vote by assent. So if any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? Okay, I'll take that as agreement. Right, we move on to item 6. Matters requiring approval or consideration by the council. So this is a referral from the Standards and Constitutional Oversight Committee. Members will note that a table of consequential amendments have been circulated as a result of the resolution from that committee. I now call on Councillor Tony Cox to move the recommendations detailed on the summons. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I have 5 minutes to move this, but it won't be taking the full 5 minutes. I would like to see all of the amendments before we vote on them, though. That would be very handy.
I'm just going to propose a seconder, Tony. Yes, okay. I now call on...
Proposed, yeah, formally moved.
Okay, thank you. And I call on Councillor McLaughlin to second.
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. As you said, Tony, you have 5 minutes to speak to your motion, okay? And I'm aware of 2 amendments submitted on this item. These will be debated individually and in turn. The first amendment is due to be proposed by Councillor Gilchrist and seconded by Councillor Corubia. Councillor Gilchrist.
I so move at this stage, speak at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Okay. And seconded by Councillor Corubia.
Yeah, I so move, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Right. Have we got second amendment?
Mr. Mayor, there's an amendment from the Labour Group, which I
Sorry,
move.
I should have known that. Yes. Councillor Wilson and
Councillor Leach, I'll be seconding that, Mr. Mayor.
okay, thank you. Okay. Got that. Okay. Right, before we move on, I just want to remind councillors that following the adoption of the new constitution and consideration by the Standards and Constitution Committee, section 15.6 of the Constitution takes us back to the model where only one amendment may be moved and discussed at any one time. No future amendments may be moved until the amendment under discussion has been disposed of. Okay, sorry, and now I'll go first of all to Councillor Cox. It's got 5 minutes. Sorry, people are...
Mr. Mayor, we're talking about there's going to be another amendment. I haven't seen the other amendment. I don't think Councillor Cox has. So it's very hard to, I would imagine, to deal with that without having seen it, really.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I've just seen that in the chat box. Councillor Williamson, are you able to respond to that, please?
I'm sure that the amendment can be circulated. It's a very short one. I can speak to it tonight or have it circulated now. I'd defer to Phil McCourt on this one.
Phil, can I go over to you, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it will be very helpful to council to see that amendment in writing. Perhaps someone from the Labour Group could place it in the meeting chat so that it can be there in writing to be picked up. Obviously, things are slightly different here in that you will shortly invite the First Amendment to be debated. Yes. And then would invite any further amendments after that First Amendment has been voted on.
Okay. Councillor Green, is that okay by you?
Always happy to follow Mr McCourt's advice, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Green. Okay, Councillor Cox, you have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It falls to me to formally propose the new constitution as detailed in the agenda this evening. I won't go too deeply into the background. I think we all know why we've got to this point, but it was clear that there was unrest with the former governance model. And back in October 2019, we unanimously voted to adopt a committee system. This meant a complete rewrite of the constitution, which I am pleased to report is now being completed. That is not to say that there will not be ongoing reviews of the Constitution. In fact, that is exactly why the newly formed Constitution Committee is formed, and what it will be doing, a continuous improvement type process, if you will. I'd like to put on record my thanks to the legal team, council legal team, for their hard work in producing this Constitution, but also the hard work and support of all of the working group. If anything has shown that we can work collaboratively, cross-party, then it's this process over the last 16 months. And it's been a pleasure to work with all of the group, I'd like to say. I'd also like to say pay tribute, if I can, to Councillor Blakely, who we lost not so long ago. I think it's fair to say that Chris and I locked horns on a few occasions, but he was a mentor to me, particularly on standards and constitution, having been a long-serving member on this committee. He was an advocate of the committee system, and I'm sure he would have been pleased to have seen this on the agenda this evening. Of course, as has already been mentioned, we've recently lost two Wirral West councillors too, Councillor Watt and former Councillor Elderton, who I've known and worked with for a decade now, and they will be sorely missed. My thoughts go out to their families. So, Mr Mayor, we have before us a working constitution that will enable us to adopt the committee system. Some said it couldn't be done. And whilst some councils have opted to centralise even more powers to fewer individuals through mayoral systems, we have chosen a truly transparent, open system with involvement of all 66 members, which was what was being called for. So, Mr Mayor, I am delighted to commend this document to Council for improvement this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cox. Okay, could we now move on to Phil, direct me on this. Is it on to the seconder of the motion?
Yes, Chair, it's to the seconder, and whether or not they wish to speak now or wait until the main debate after any amendments.
Okay. Councillor Mara McLaughlin.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I will very briefly second that now. It has been the subject of much discussion over the last year by members of the Working Party and the Standards and Constitutional Oversight Committee, so I won't dwell long on this. I would, however, like to add my thanks to the members of the Working Party for the positive approach they brought to the task and the level of cooperation there was across the parties. It was a formidable task to carry out the directive of Council within that allotted time, but it's thanks to them and the extraordinary work of the supporting officers that it has been completed. So now we're going to move to a new system of governance, which will be different, and we may well see some teething problems as we go into it, but which will, I am sure, do what it's intended to do in bringing better decision making, more accountability and transparency. So I hope that members will support the recommendation.
Okay. As I said earlier, I'm aware of two amendments submitted on this item, and these will be debated individually and in turn. And the first amendment is proposed by Councillor Gilchrist and seconded by Councillor Corrubia. Can I just go back to what I said earlier? I want to remind councillors that following the adoption of the new constitution, consideration by the Standards and Constitution Committee, section 15 6b of the Constitution takes us back to the model where only one amendment may be moved and discussed at any one time. No further amendment may be moved until the amendment under discussion has been disposed of. Right, so with this in mind, I call on Councillor Gilchrist to move his amendment.
Sound picture. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for introducing the item. I'm just going to go back to February. In February, members of the Audit Committee, the spokespersons, met and we exchanged emails and we worked together on the new terms of reference for the Audit Committee. Those were with officers in March and were especially considered late March by members and found to be acceptable. Within recent weeks, and only within recent weeks, our attention was drawn to a document produced by CIPVA. Now, every member has regard to the importance of the Chartered Institute for Public Finance and Accountancy, very much because they've been around all our lives. But they issued guidance for local authorities and police committees in 2018, and it was written in the land of executive members. We then had some further discussion amongst leaders and audit members about how does this apply to the committee system. And an email, to be fair, was received during the last 10 days, which I have included in the agenda paper. It is on page 7. I quoted that advice so the members could see it. Now, there has been a spirited discussion about advice and guidance and the importance of either, or both even at the same time, because my amendment has been studied by officers and found to be in order, and we have later on an amendment from the Labour group. The effect of the Labour amendment is to remove anyone who happens to serve on Policy and Resources Committee to being our chair of Audit Committee, and it may remove some members. And during discussions amongst leaders, we found that this could apply to as many as 21 members of the council. So we have had before us guidance, which we have paid regard to. We've had advice, which we have listened to. We are not brushing that advice aside. What is so surprising that even this afternoon, it was only within the last few minutes that we received the exact wording of the Labour amendment. But to be fair, we did know what its general terms would be. And Councillor Williamson throughout has said that we must follow guidance. My view is that we are setting up a new system and we shall see how it works in practice. We trust members, if they have covered something before and been closely involved in it, to appreciate that and seek advice on that, and probably, if it's necessary and found to be necessary, they will withdraw themselves if they find themselves conflicted. But it is very surprising.
About 15 seconds remaining.
Thank you. This late amendment is surprising, and I commend members to the document that I've put on page 7 as the proposed resolution of this problem. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. I now call on Councillor Corubia, seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah, the CIPVA Practical Guide for Audit Committees for Local Authorities 2018 edition is what Phil was just talking about. And under the heading of that, the composition and operation of the committee, it does state that elected members of local authorities are members of the council and thus a part of the body charged with governance. Elected members being knowledgeable of the organisation, its objectives and policies to the audit committee. The point that follows that, Mr. Mayor, is the important point to note, and it states that members who are also involved in scrutiny or standards offer additional knowledge of activity, risks and challenges affecting these areas. So the whole debate would therefore seem to rest on the definition of an executive member. But the CIPVA advice given is based around the strong leader and cabinet model, as previously suggested. I would suggest that moving to a committee-based system where decisions are made by committee and not by an individual executive cabinet member, by definition, would mean that all councillors in decision-making committees are therefore executive members. And if we accept that point, then the following advice given from CIPVA, that inviting an executive member onto the committee should be avoided, may cause us some significant problems. Mr. Mayor, I've taken note of the response from CIPVA on this issue, And unless there's been any further notification of which I'm unaware, the latest response given from the advisor stated that it was how she would recommend that it is interpreted. This leaves little doubt that a firm position is not currently held by SIFA on this issue. So I would like to highlight the last paragraph of this amendment, which asks for more clarity in the advice given to enable us to apply it in the best and most appropriate manner going forward. So I would recommend that this amendment be passed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Corrubia. Right, we'll now have a debate on the amendment only and vote before we return to the original motion as amended or otherwise. Okay, do any councillors wish to speak on the amendment? If so, you have 3 minutes to address the council. Okay, sorry, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't intending to speak, but I think it's probably worthwhile just to explain one or two things. And could I also mention and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your the respect of the entire council has shown to David Elderton and Councillor Jeffrey Watt, who was, as a ward colleague, they were both tremendous people, and we've lost two outstanding public servants, in fact. So thank you for that. And can I also thank the Standards Committee, the working group that put together the Constitution. It's clearly been a huge role. I did attend one, and I can attest to the fact that there was a lot of cross-party involvement in that and the work that's been done. My concern with, I know we're talking about this amendment, but the discussions that have taken place around this is that they came very late. I'm unaware of whether they were actually discussed by the working group. As Phil has highlighted and Chris, that it seemed to be we were getting advice on the hoof as opposed to an opportunity to see anything, to discuss it, to talk to the people that were giving the advice and to find out whether it was accurate. I say that because, as I understand it from Tony, and maybe he can cover this later, there is actually no requirement in a committee system to have an audit committee. And there was a discussion about whether indeed we should even have one or whether it should be combined with something else. And so it seems a bit strange that we're all now dancing on the head of this particular pen. I mean, my issue really, and the thing I want everyone to accept, all members and officers, is that it is now the council that is sovereign. We don't have an executive. The committees, including Policy and Resources Committee and other committees, are just representatives of the council in a smaller group, and therefore it is the council that is sovereign. The other thing I'd point out is that, and again I think Phil has made this point previously, that it is behaviours that matter, and it is the way that Audit and Risk Committee has behaved. I'm conscious we haven't been applying the guidance, as it turns out, for a couple of years. However, I think the behaviours that have been adopted by that committee and the work that it has done has shown that it is more than capable, and members are more than capable of understanding where the boundaries lie. I think the amendment moved by Councillor Gilchrist is helpful. It clarifies matters for those that are concerned around these, and it also asks for a further review, and therefore I'm just finishing, Mr. Mayor, and therefore I also will be supporting it and commend it to the council.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any other contributions?
Mr. Mayor?
No.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh yes, sorry, Councillor Pat Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I just also briefly add my condolences to the families of Councillor Jeffrey Watt and former Councillor David Elderton I totally endorse the comments that have been made by yourself and others. They were both lovely men, and I was very proud to know both of them. I just want to make a very brief point about this amendment. Reference has been made to the SIPFA advice. I think it's useful to read out some of that advice that we have received, because it's very clear and it's very straightforward. The advice from the SIPFA representative says, in reference to what they define as an executive member, it says, I would define executive member as used in the guidance to mean a member of the Policy and Resources Committee or chair of one of the other policy committees. So my view, Mr. Mayor, is that, especially as we are starting out on the new committee system, that it would be unwise and not to clearly follow the guidance that we have been provided by SIPFA. Yes, by all means, we can review and look at it as things go forward, but as the amendment before us is laid out, that deviates from that advice. So therefore, I could not support it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Stuart Whittingham.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to associate myself with all the comments regarding Councillors Elderson and Councillor Watt. Sad loss to the community, and every sympathy and thoughts with their families. And it's also worth noting that we recently lost a council officer as well, so I'd like to pay my respects to his family and friends. I'd like to support Councillor Cleary's stance on this. It's quite clear in the advice, the guidance we've received from SIPFA, in the fact that for the primary purpose of the advice is that they would define an executive member as used in the guidance to mean a member of the Policy and Resources Committee. And to me, for no member of the Audit Committee or even the chair of the Audit Committee sits on Policy and Resources, to me, there's a bit of a bad taste in the mouth. I don't know if it's right. People should be marking their own work. So I will not be voting for this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Whittingham. Councillor Jeanette Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, I'd also like to pass on my condolences to Jeffrey Watt and David Helderson's family. It's been a really sad week for us all on the council, and I would just like to say on record that they were both highly thought of within the Labour group, and I'm really sorry at the events that unfolded. Just to keep it very brief, really, we are entering into a new system of governance, and for the sake of good governance, I couldn't support this amendment from Councillor Gilchrist. I recognise that previously we may not have necessarily practiced good practice with having cabinet members on audit and risk, but that certainly is not a reason to continue with poor practice. It's actually a reason for us to revise what we do and make this system work. And I think we have to adhere to the guidance we've been given. I think it's a broadly held principle that you don't scrutinise decisions you've taken part in. And so for that reason, I wouldn't be voting for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Any other contributions? No? Okay. Right. I'll now call on the seconder of the amendment, and Councillor Karoubi, you have 3 minutes to speak to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't aware I had 2 goes at this 3-minute lot, but there you go.
It seems that, yeah.
It does, doesn't it? I think it's quite interesting that a lot of this is hinging on the SIPFA recommendations, and I do agree that we should adhere to their recommendations. But unfortunately, Councillor Cleary, when he stated what the response was, it does actually say that it was her personal interpretation of these facts and not a SIPFA recommendation. So I know it's like we're arguing semantics here, but I think if you read the proposal put in by Councillor Gilchrist fully, and it seems to be the most reasoned way forward for me. So I would implore people to vote for this and not simply go with advice because it's for advice's sake.
Okay, apologies. I shouldn't have had a second go, but
No, that's what I thought.
So you're absolutely
Thank you,
right,
Mr. Mayor.
I'll move on to the proposer of the original motion, Councillor Gilchrist.
I didn't feel it appropriate to talk about the members we've lost in this debate, but along with all those who've spoken, then I respect and understand that loss for our members and our families of two dedicated servants of the borough. I want to turn now to the audit matter. We've heard from Councillor Cleary about it being unwise. We've heard from Councillor Whittingham about marking our own homework. Councillor Williamson talks about the sake of good governance. Mr. Mayor, the original document we had circulated a week or so ago said having executive members on the committee is discouraged as it could deter the committee from being able to challenge or hold to account the executive on governance, risk and control matters. In my amendment, Mr. Mayor, I have made sure and asked that chairs of committees should not be on the audit committee. We've moved some considerable way to understand what we were being told, and we've accepted a greater part of the advice. Where we're parting company is on the issue of ruling out experience and the issues of independence. It's my belief that there are members who are definitely experienced and independent who sat on the audit committee who are being ruled out by this strict adherence, it might be called, to what is after all guidance. And as has been suggested, there are members who might have been involved in decisions in the past. And I suggest that members could look at what audit committee actually discusses. If there were an item which a member had been specifically involved, because in future all members are going to be involved in some way on committees or at council passing a matter of business, then we are restricting unnecessarily the membership of the committee. And what we're doing in this amendment is giving an opportunity to learn, to see whether we allegedly mark our own homework or allegedly we take unwise decisions. Members are very cautious beings, frankly, and members on audit committee have great experience in digging into things and studying certain reports and things that have gone wrong. And in that spirit, Mr. Mayor, I commend the amendment to council that's set out in the order paper, which for members' reference is on page 7. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Okay, to be no further, as we've got no further speakers, I will now move to the vote on the amendment. When called, please turn on your camera and state clearly whether you are for, against, or wish to abstain. I now ask the Phil McCourt to undertake a roll call of members.
Forgive me, Mayor. Before you do, the right of reply at the end of that debate, I'm afraid it wasn't to Councillor Gilchrist, I'm afraid it was to Councillor Cox.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, sorry, I have it. Yeah, you're absolutely
right. Councillor Cox.
I did think I got a right of reply, but I was waiting to see what it called.
I do apologise, Councillor Cox.
Yes,
I did.
Afraid the move of the amendment didn't get a second go, but nonetheless.
Right. Okay. Councillor Cox, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be as brief as I can. I think the pertinent point here that's been picked up by Councillor Karubia is that the guidance from CIPFA it's clearly structured for a cabinet system when you have a very defined executive. Now, there is no executive on the committee system. You can look at it one of two ways. Either we are all of us now have executive powers because everyone who sits on any of the policy and services committees or policy and resources for that matter will have some sort of executive power. Or you could look at it in Councillor Green's terms that none of those committees actually have any executive power at all. It is really the council, but as an overarching body. But the point for me is this amendment seems this amendment for me, the Liberal amendment, I think gives us exactly what we need, right? It gives us the flexibility to review whether it is working or not, whether we are actually adhering to advice, and it is only advice. But what we need to not lose focus of is the fact that whilst it's a two-tier system and the Policy and Services Committee sit below, if you like, the Policy and Resources Committee. The Policy and Resources Committee is not a cabinet, So you cannot distinguish between the different committees as to decision making. So what we could effectively do, if we were to eliminate the ability to have anyone from Policy and Resources or anyone in an executive type role, is to not have anyone on audit at all, because you literally wouldn't be able to adopt anyone onto audit because they have some sort of executive power. But something else that, just to touch on that, Councillor Green mentioned again, which he wanted me to reiterate. Yeah, in the committee system, there is absolutely no, in my understanding, absolutely not a necessity at all to have an audit system at all. This is an extra layer that we are opting to add in. So in real terms, the audit function could really be incorporated into the system itself. So we are opting to have an extra layer with the audit function and the audit committee. So therefore, I don't see that we are losing anything by having any overlap. We're actually introducing extra safeguards. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Councillor Williamson.
Sorry to come in at this late stage, Mr. Mayor. I was just seeking some clarification really from Phil McCourt around the voting that's going to ensue now. I just need to clarify whether or not our amendment stands alone or whether it's an amendment to Councillor Gilchrist's amendments. I do apologise, everyone.
Thank you. Apologies, Mr. Mayor. The wording that has been put up in the chat, Mr. Mayor, looks like, and Councillor Williamson can confirm or otherwise, but I understand that to be an amendment to Councillor Gilchrist's in effect. So there is a vote on Councillor Gilchrist's. If accepted, that becomes the substantive motion, and then a further amendment could be moved, which will be this, which would add words to it by the looks of it. If Councillor Gilchrist's amendment falls, then something new and different would need to come forward. So it's one amendment at a time.
Thank you for that. Thanks very much. I wasn't quite sure. Thanks for that, Phil.
Okay, everyone clear now? Yes. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, could I have a point of clarification from the legal officer, please? Of course.
Go ahead.
So basically, in your preamble, in your instruction, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned that the new constitution, and Mr. McCourt, clarified this. The new constitution is that one amendment can be debated and voted at a time. However, the new constitution is not being passed yet. So surely that's not enforced yet.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Mayor, this discussion was had in the member working group, Councillor Whittingham, and the outcome of that discussion was to return to the council rule that one amendment at a time. Actually, the council's existing standing orders, so before this is adopted, says exactly the same thing. It's just that there has been a custom and practice in Wirral to have one debate and then vote on the amendments as though they were separate debates, which, as we saw a year or so ago, became somewhat confusing for members and for members of the public watching. So the discussion within the member working group and the committee was to return to the standard approach, and indeed the one that's already in the council's standing orders. One amendment, debate on the amendment, then there's a new substantive which could be further amended if members so wished. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I just seek further clarity on this? I do apologise, everyone. This is completely new, isn't it, to us all, this in terms of taking amendments separately. So we're going to vote on Councillor Gilchrist's amendment to our new constitution. And then the Labour amendment will amend Councillor Gilchrist's. Am I correct in saying that?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, that's my reading of your proposal, Councillor Williamson.
Okay, thank you.
For intruding at this point, Mr. Mayor, if I might ask for further advice, this seems to be a special time for advice. If council votes down my proposal, it isn't there. If council supports my proposal, it would be then part of the constitution, which could then be amended. Now, if I've misunderstood it, I'd love to be corrected, and I look forward to advice. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, Councillor Gilchrist's summation is correct.
Mr. Mayor, sorry to keep coming in. Oh, I think Ian's hand was up first.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. I think you're on to Councillor Williamson has a hand up asking for clarification.
Yeah, I've just been offline for about 5 minutes. I've just reconnected again. So apologies. I've been off for 5 minutes. I just had to reconnect. Councillor Williamson, sorry, I've missed a bit of that. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's a little bit confusing because it's all quite new, isn't it? I suppose I was just seeking clarification really on the two amendments that have come before council tonight, that they are completely separate to each other, that if Councillor Gilchrist is voted down, then how would that impact on our amendments? I'm a little bit unsure really, and I do apologise. Maybe it's me, maybe it's been, you know, a bit of confusion on this part, but I would really be grateful for some clarification on this.
Phil, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor Williamson, if you wish to amend effectively Councillor Gilchrist's amendment, then he either has to accept it and alter his own at the beginning, or it would need to be voted for so that you could then further amend the substantive motion. Or if you voted against it, put in something different to alter the original amendment, the original motion.
Thank you, Phil.
So when you say different, you're saying that the amendment that we put forward is not different enough currently?
If I may, Mr. Mayor,
yes,
it seems to me that your amendment, Councillor Williamson, is an addition to Councillor Gilchrist's, and therefore is not strictly against it. It's not a negation of Councillor Gilchrist's amendment. It's literally an amendment to it.
Okay. So we need to vote on Councillor Gilchrist and then vote on our amendments of his amendment.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for calling me. I'm not sure which point you were offline, Mr. Mayor, but a situation developed where we had studied my amendment. It transpired that my amendment is the one on the paper before us, and that Councillor Williamson, if she amended it in line with what's in the chat box, it would cause the following difficulty. My amendment as it stands, needs to be passed by council to be on the order paper in order to be amended by Councillor Williamson. Now, that's how I understand it, and I think Mr. McCourt concurred with my interpretation.
Yes.
I have to say, Mr. Mayor, that trying to introduce this at this very late time, when we're about to set up a system that is capable of working, is of considerable surprise to me. And I think council would be safer to have my amendment adopted and then discuss the matter at another time. But I'm entirely in the hands of Councillor Williamson, who wishes to proceed. I'm not prepared to accept her suggested amendments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope that's clear.
Thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Councillor Williamson, do you wish to?
I think, yes, I think that's clarified matters. We're prepared to proceed with the vote. I'm not going to withdraw our amendment, thanks.
Okay. Right. We've now, I don't think we've got any further speakers on that, and I hope we can now move to the vote on the amendment. Is that right, Phil?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, so remember, please turn your camera on and state clearly whether you are for, against, or wish to abstain. Hand over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I could just remind members, excuse me, if I could remind members that this is a vote on Councillor Gilchrist's amendment and that alone.
Yes.
Members, if you could turn on your camera and then speak as I call your name, I'd be grateful. Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Berry.
I'm voting for.
Councillor Bird.
For.
Councillor Graham.
I'm voting for the amendment.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
For.
Councillor Cameron.
Voting for.
Councillor Cannon.
For.
Councillor Kruby.
I'm voting for.
Councillor Cleary.
Cleary voting against.
Councillor Clements.
Councillor Clements voting for.
Councillor Collins.
Voting for.
Councillor Cook.
Voting against.
Councillor Corkill.
Andy Corkill voting for.
Councillor Cotty.
For.
Councillor Cox.
For.
Councillor Davies.
Voting for.
Councillor Fawkes.
Councillor Fawkes voting for.
Councillor Frost.
For.
Councillor Gardner.
Voting for.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Voting for, thank you.
Councillor Carl Greeney.
For.
Councillor Jeff Green.
Voting for.
Councillor Gray.
For.
Councillor Hayes.
For.
Councillor Stephen Hayes.
Voting for.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
Voting for.
Councillor Kathy Hodson.
Voting for.
Councillor Johnson.
Voting for.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
For.
Councillor Chris Jones.
For.
Councillor Sharon Jones.
For.
Councillor Tony Jones.
For.
Councillor Jordan.
Voting for.
Councillor Kelly.
Voting for.
Councillor Kenny.
For.
Councillor Leach.
Voting for.
Councillor Lewis.
Councillor Lewis voting for.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Councillor McLaughlin voting for.
Councillor McManus.
Councillor can't even think of my name now. Councillor McManus voting for. Sorry.
Councillor Mitchell.
Voting for.
Councillor Muspratt,
Voting for.
Councillor Nolan,
For.
Councillor Norbury,
For, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Povell,
Voting for.
Councillor Rennie,
Councillor Rennie voting for.
Councillor Robinson,
Voting for.
Councillor Rowlands,
Voting for.
Councillor Smith,
Abstain.
Councillor Spore,
For.
Councillor Spriggs,
Councillor Christine Spriggs voting for.
Councillor Stapleton,
Councillor Stapleton voting for.
Councillor Stewart,
Councillor Paul Stewart voting for.
Councillor Sullivan,
Councillor Sullivan voting for.
Councillor Usher,
Councillor Usher voting for.
Councillor Walsh,
Councillor Walsh voting for.
Councillor Whittingham,
Councillor Whittingham abstain.
Councillor Williams, Irene Williams,
Councillor Irene Williams voting for.
Councillor Jerry Williams,
Councillor Jerry Williams voting for. Councillor Irene Williams' computer's just gone down, so she's now on my computer. Thank you.
Councillor Steve Williams,
Steve Williams voting for.
Councillor Williamson,
For.
Councillor Wood,
Councillor Wood voting for.
and Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright voting for.
Thank you, members.
Okay, if I can just announce the voting. For 58, against 2, and 2 abstentions. Thank you. So that has been won. Okay. Phil, do we go on to the Second Amendment now?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So that now becomes the substantive motion. So the recommendations on the paper now include the wording added by Councillor Gilchrist's amendment. That's now the
Councillor
substantive
Cox's,
motion.
yes.
And you can now invite any further amendments to that substantive motion.
Right, okay. So I will ask if anyone else wants to make an amendment. Can I ask someone to?
Mr Mayor?
Councillor
Hi.
Williamson?
Hi, I
Yes.
put my hand up. Thanks, Mr Mayor. So yeah, I did put in the chat box our amendment of Councillor Gilchrist's amendment. So just bear with me. It's basically that we accept SIPFA's guidance and we delete and at the 7th paragraph and insert or any other member of the Policy and Resources Committee. Mr Mayor, I won't rehearse the arguments any further. We've just had quite a lengthy and robust debate about this matter. It is our belief that members on audit and risk do a great job. They do a great scrutiny. They perform a great scrutiny role. And we think that the separation between scrutiny and policy and resources should remain. So I think that I will leave it there, really. Thank you.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Anita Leach.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Likewise, there's not a great deal to add to that, really. Just in terms of what Jeanette Williamson has just said, I just fully support that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Phil, do we need to go to debate on that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So it's now to invite any speakers and then a right of reply from Councillor Cox as mover of the original motion.
Councillor Cox again. Yeah. Okay. So do any councillors wish to speak on that particular amendment?
Mr. Mayor, I put my hand up.
Yeah, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for calling me. What an interesting situation. I want to go back to when this was clarified by SIPFA. There was an email from SIPFA which arrived to Mr. Niblock, our Chief Auditor, on Wednesday the 23rd of September in the afternoon. It did indeed include that paragraph that I had reproduced in full in my amendment, which is now part of the Constitution, though it might be removed, of course. And it was clear that this matter arose at the last minute. And as we've heard in the last hour, Labour members drew up an amendment during the afternoon and circulated it during this meeting. I do not believe that by adopting my formula, we are ignoring SIPFA's guidance. We're not undermining it to such an extent that it is inoperable. I believe that in my last paragraph, I suggested that there was a way of approaching this. The amendment drafted and now circulated by Councillor Williamson rules out any other member of the Policy and Resources Committee, added to those chairs that I included, so no member of the Policy and Resources Committee is able to serve on the Audit Committee. I happen to think that that takes away experience. It happens to take away some members who are very independent-minded. And I think we have an opportunity over the next 6-7 months before we review our Constitution and adopt it with changes next May. We have an opportunity to use a workable arrangement that I put forward. So I would ask Council not to support the amendment being put forward by Councillor Williamson and seconded by Councillor Leach. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Have we got any other speakers? Councillor Mara McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't intend to take part in this discussion, though I have been part of the discussions that have taken place before we got to this position this evening. I have to say that the Labour position has changed during the course of those discussions, because when we got the first guidance from SIPFA, the argument made by them then was that we should accept it because it's advice given to us by a reputable organisation and it's foolish to ignore advice. And in the main, I agree with that. However, the advice or guidance did change. And what changed then was the Labour position, because they then said we should accept the advice or guidance given by SIPFA, which was different from the first set of advice that we got. So that inconsistency has bothered me. What bothers me also is we are a council of 5 parties. At the moment, 2 of the small parties are not included on the Audit and Risk Management Committee, and I understand the reasons for that. They're viable reasons. I think, if my understanding is correct, that if the Labour amendment is passed tonight, that would mean that the Liberal Democrats have to either make a choice between a place on P&R or a place on Audit and Risk Management. If they were to choose the place on P&R, then Audit and Risk Management would be, first of all, drawn from a pool of greatly diminished numbers, and secondly, exclude 3 of the parties on this council. Now, I'm sorry, but that doesn't seem to me to be a good way to do business. I think the amendment that Councillor Gilchrist put forward is a compromise, but it's a compromise that's workable, and it seeks to get better clarification than we've had so far from SIPFA. I think we need that. So I caution, first of all, the Labour group not to paint themselves into a situation where in the future they blindly accept guidance because it comes from a reputable organisation without question. And secondly, to take an action which would exclude 3 of the 5 parties of this council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. I've got 2 other people, and let me just see, Councillor Ian Lewis. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And like Councillor McLaughlin, I would be very concerned if we voted for an amendment that by default excluded any political party from the decision-making or the review process that we're about to adopt. And I would also be concerned, Mr. Mayor, that any attempts to portray the P&R Committee, the Policy and Resources Committee, as some kind of cabinet light. That is not the intention behind the new constitution. The new constitution has been written by all parties with a view to making decision-making available to all 66 councillors and not by those selected to serve on P&R. I think it's very important that we don't seek to reintroduce the cabinet system by another name, which is what happens with this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Chris Carubia. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just following on from Councillor Lewis's point. I'm asking for clarification really on the numbers, because if we follow the advice that the Labour Party are putting in to this amendment, I think it was said previously that we would lose 22 or so seats of people that could apply to be on that committee. But does it also then follow that any deputies would be included in that, to be added to that figure? So not only would 3 of the smaller parties be exempt, so would the 22 odd councillors, but so would their understudies, if you like, to that committee. So that would make the pool even smaller of the amount of people we could put onto scrutiny.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Councillor Stuart Whittingham.
Yeah, I find it amazing we've got members, urging councils to ignore advice from specialist advice from reputable organisations. SIPFA is a well-renowned organisation that deals with finance of councils, and the advice should be taken seriously. Why parties will be excluded from the Audit Risk Committee it baffles me, because there's only one Lib Dem on the Audit Risk Committee, and there's 6 Lib Dems. Why if the individual member of the Liberal Democrat Party, the Liberal Democrat group, decide they need this on the policy and resources, why they cannot be replaced by another member of the Liberal Democrat group? And what the Lib Dem amendment doesn't prevent is the chair of audit sitting on the Policy and Resources Committee, which to me should be a red line.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whittingham. Councillor Jeff Green. Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think this whole discussion, the sort of chat box amendment, and we were told the Labour group were voting against Councillor Gilchrist's amendment, and then they ended up voting for it, and some abstained, and what have you. It shows the kind of what can happen if someone tries to bounce somebody into decisions. And I think it explains a lot of the thinking that we all had when we wanted to get away from the executive model and to try and be more inclusive about changes and how we went about making decisions. It strikes me that a number of people have made a whole range of raised good questions, and whatever's come from SIPFA has come from SIPFA, and that seems to be, as I mentioned before, evolving, and does seem to still stick to the executive model, rather than, as I believe, that the council is sovereign and everything, all committees hang from that. And I think Councillor Lewis described it as trying to make it an executive light, which strikes me as the right thing. I find it extraordinary that we all ended up getting bounced into this decision at this sort of in such a short time scale, and it shows what a fantastic job Tony Cox and his and the, should I say, working group did, where it was able to take these issues, discuss them, work out the right position, and to make sure we had some good governance. From what I can tell, Councillor Gilchrist's amendment does that. It puts it back into their hands to have a look and to review what works and what doesn't. And I think, if anything, this is a classic example of how the executive used to work, being bouncing council into decisions. That is exactly why we tried to introduce a committee system, more inclusive, more open, more transparent, and I would therefore commend Councillor Gilchrist's amendment that it goes back to the review or the working group, so as we can get a sensible solution, as opposed to what this appears to be, which is just a bit chaotic, frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Green. I'd just like to, have you got any other? Oh, yeah, Councillor Pat Cleary. Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few final brief comments from me. First of all, I don't accept that smaller groups are excluded from the Audit and Risk Committee if we vote for this further amendment. We are excluded from lots of committees because of simple mathematics, and there is no reason why smaller groups with more than, well, with 2 members, you can still be on the Audit Committee if that's how the numbers pan out. It does not exclude us. And as I said before, this decision can be reviewed over the next 6 months. And a lot of people have made that point in the context that we should just stick with the amendment that we have just voted for. Well, the opposite also applies, Mr. Mayor. We can review a different arrangement over the next 6 months, and if we feel we need to change it, we can do so in due course. So I will be supporting the Labour amendment for the reasons I've just outlined and previously given. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Pat. I need to sort of take a moment to talk to the monitoring officer. A number of people seem to be having difficulties. Phil, can I just ask your advice on this? I know Councillor Jean Robinson has had to drop out and has gone on to a personal email account as a guest. I think some other people are having difficulties. Is that right?
There were some notification of very brief difficulties, Mayor. The supporting officers have said Councillor Robinson is the only person who had to formally drop out and come back in again. We were out on the verge of saying if that had been any longer or had any other member joined her, we would have asked you to adjourn the meeting briefly. We've said previously in the protocol that we'll give 5 minutes or so for somebody to join back in. Otherwise, it may put their vote at risk if they haven't heard the debate.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Thanks for that. I know there's another contribution. Sorry, could you put up your hand? Yeah, Councillor Andrew Gardner. Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure I speak for what I'll call sort of the average council member here, in the, you know, this new system hasn't got off to an auspicious start tonight. It really hasn't. You know, we can't have amendments tabled basically, it seems, within the meeting. You know, we have to have time to look at amendments and see them through, and for that reason I think the Labour group is wrong to try and amend at this stage. We've heard that the constitution is iterative, so if there is an issue going forward, we can change it at council. I think it's wrong for council tonight to try and, you know, I think the phrase has been used, bounce members into making decisions that haven't been thoroughly thought out and haven't been properly presented. And I don't think it's done this council any favours tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gardner. Have I got any other contributions? All right, and the people who've lost connection are all back in, so that's good news. Councillor Alan Brame. Alan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I just, following on from Councillor Gardner's contribution, could I ask for clarification whether we have a deadline for the submission of amendments to Council?
Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. In terms of amendments to notices of motion, then yes, the deadline was last Wednesday. When it comes to debates over decisions of council, decisions that would affect the council, and therefore positions may change during the debate. So this is one, the budget may be another. Then amendments can come forward at any time. When amendments tend to come within a meeting as a result of debate between members, so that one or more of you may change your mind listening to others debate, then if it's a complex amendment, we would normally ask for a short adjournment to review and understand that. In this case, it was fairly simple and straightforward, and we'd had a few minutes before the meeting to quickly review it. So this is unusual in that sense, Councillor Bain.
Thank you for that clarification.
Notice of motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Phil. Right, I've got another Councillor Ian Lewis. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to Councillor Braham's question and the monitoring officer's response, for the benefit of colleagues and for those of us who have a copy of the Constitution, could the monitoring officer point us to the relevant section of the Constitution for his advice that he's just given, so that we don't make this mistake again, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, this is where I ask for the new or old, as it were. So in the previous constitution, the timings were somewhat later than the Wednesday I've just referred to, but by convention last year with yourself, Mr. Mayor, we moved it back so there will be more time to consider amendments, to iron out things as per this evening, and in the new constitution it's in the rules of debate on motions and submissions of amendment at Standing Order 15.
In that case, Mr. Mayor, if I may, I understand it because we haven't yet, in terms of the new constitution, are we operating under the old constitution at the moment or the new constitution, please?
The old one, Councillor Lewis. Forgive me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Right, so if I may, Mr. Mayor, if we're operating under the old constitution, what is the timeline for submission of an amendment, please?
It's the same, Councillor Lewis. So in a debate, there is no time frame. In terms of notices of motion, it was 10 a.m. Friday, and then by agreement moved back to the Wednesday.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, got another contribution. Councillor Chris Carubia.
That's not my hand up, Mr. Mayor. That's Christine Spriggs.
Okay, apologies. Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Christine Spriggs. Christine.
Yes, quite simply, Mr. Mayor, could I ask that we move progress, please?
Okay, thank you. Okay, right, okay, I think that's all the contributions. Yes, okay, can I ask Councillor Tony Cox? Tony, respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I think allowing people to actually speak and debate is making progress. I'd just like to say that I'm a bit disappointed actually that this has come about, because these sorts of idiosyncrasies we've managed to work around within the Constitution over the last 8 months now, no, 12 months, sorry, actually, when we started working on the Constitution. Dare I say it, with my ability to force things through and get things moving, and the fact that I've been out of the country and not actually noticed this was taking place, I'm a bit disappointed that we've got to the situation where we're actually attempting to adopt the Constitution, and now we're having a debate over quite a pertinent section within it. So what I would say is this is exactly the type of fag packet policy that we're making, that we were trying to avoid by going to the committee system. so that it could have true, transparent debate. And that's not really what we're doing here now. If this is passed now, I have no real thought being given clearly to the knock-on effects. The fact that 17 of the probably we can presume 17 of the most experienced people on the council who will sit on P&R will not be able to have any input whatsoever to the audit process, which I think is a failing in itself, if I'm brutally honest. There's a reason why the people who are going on to P&R are being chosen to go there, and it's for skills, abilities and experience that they have. And to eradicate that from the possibility of having them on audits is a failing. And I think it is something that we really need to think about before we vote here. As my ward colleague, Councillor Gardner, has just alluded to, the Constitution, it's not a fixed document. It is the whole point, and it's not been used like this effectively before within the council. The whole point of the Constitution committee is that we do review it and we do improve it, and it's never taken place, and it's needed something like this to kick up the backside to get us to actually rewrite it in the first instance. But it's not it's a work in progress still. If we're not happy with it, and if we believe that there has been a failing on our part by allowing audit to be involved, or vice versa with P&R, then we can remove it at a later date. I think this is a very poor way to actually set policy at this late time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cox. Okay, I don't think there's any other speakers, so I'll now move to the vote on the amendment. Is that right, Phil?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay. So again, when called, remember to turn on your camera and state clearly whether you are for, against, or abstaining. Okay, Phil, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is the vote on the further amendment.
Further amendment, yes.
Now substantive motion. So Councillor Anderson.
Against.
Councillor Berry.
Against.
Councillor Bird.
For.
Councillor Brain.
Against.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
Against.
Councillor Cameron.
Against.
Councillor Cannon.
For.
Councillor Carubia.
Against.
Councillor Cleary.
For.
Councillor Clements.
Against.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Cook.
For.
Councillor Corkill.
Against.
Councillor Cottier.
For.
Councillor Cox.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Fawkes.
For.
Councillor Frost.
For.
Councillor Gardner.
Against.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Against.
Councillor Carl Greeny.
I understand Councillor Carl Greeny has lost his connection.
Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Gray.
Councillor Gray for.
Councillor Paul Hayes.
Against.
Councillor Stephen Hayes.
Against.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
Against.
Councillor Kathy Hodson.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
Adrian Jones, for.
Councillor Chris Jones.
For.
Councillor Sharon Jones.
For.
Councillor Tony Jones.
For.
Councillor Jordan.
Against.
Councillor Kelly.
Against.
Councillor Kenny.
For.
Councillor Leach.
Councillor Leach for.
Councillor Lewis.
Councillor Ian Lewis against.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Councillor Moira McLaughlin against.
Councillor McManus.
Councillor McManus for.
Councillor Mitchell.
Against.
Councillor Muspratt.
For.
Councillor Nolan.
4.
Councillor Norbury.
4, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Povell.
Against.
Councillor Rennie.
Against.
Councillor Robinson.
4.
Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Rowlands against.
Councillor Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Spore.
4.
Councillor Spriggs.
Councillor Christine Spriggs, 4.
Councillor Stapleton.
4.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart, 4.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mike Sullivan against.
Councillor Usher.
Councillor Usher, 4.
Councillor Walsh.
4.
Councillor Whittingham.
Councillor Wiscombe, 4.
Councillor Irene Williams.
4.
Councillor Jerry
Sorry,
Williams.
4.
Sorry, Councillor Jerry Williams.
4.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Steve Williams against.
Councillor Williamson.
Councillor Williamson, 4.
Councillor Wood.
4.
And Councillor Wright.
Against.
Thank you, members.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
So one of our members is having connection trouble.
Yes.
Should
Council-
not be given the opportunity to vote.
Councillor Carl Greeny, yes.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor, can I just say that I've just sent Carl the phone number that apparently you can use. So he's just had that number now. Thank you.
Do you want to wait on the voting, Phil?
Mr. Mayor, you may wish to adjourn for a moment to allow Councillor Greeny to come back in, but you would need to ask him if he'd missed any of the debate. You've missed the
Okay, I will do that,
debate.
yes.
Vote.
Louis, just for fairness, just wait a minute. A few minutes, please.
Back in now, everyone.
Yes, I'm back.
in now, okay.
Carl, are you back in?
I am, yes.
Right. Carl, have you missed much of the debate? Have you had a chance to listen to the debate?
I have, Mr. Mayor. I've missed a few minutes while I've been trying to log back on again.
All right. Right, Phil, what are we talking about? 5 minutes, Carl?
Slightly less, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I think important, Mr. Mayor, is did Councillor Greeny hear Councillor Cox summing up? Right of reply, rather, because I feel that's an important part of the debate.
Did you hear the contribution from Councillor Cox at the end?
Not all of it, no. Not all of it, Mr. Mayor.
No, okay, thank you. No.
We asked Tony to make his speech again.
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
No.
So obviously we weren't able to tell Mr. Mayor how much of the speech was missed. So if Councillor Greeny feels he'd heard enough together with the rest of the debate to submit his vote, he may. If he feels he's missed a significant part of the debate, then I would advise he steps away.
Yes. Okay.
This just Phil McCourt, so I can say this. We can check this afterwards, obviously, because this has been recorded.
Yes, of course, Councillor Johnson. Much of this, however, is down to Councillor Greeny himself.
I'm fine, Mr. Mayor. I think I've heard enough. Thank you to make a vote.
Thank you. Then, Councillor Greenie, what's your vote on the amendment?
Sorry, it's 4.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Sorry, I was. Right, okay, I think we've got this, just checking the numbers. That couldn't be right.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, and there's a typo in the box there. So would you like me to confirm it for you, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, there's definitely a typo wrong there,
Thank
yes.
you, Mr. Mayor. So that's 432 against 29, 1 abstention. So it's carried.
Yeah. So can you repeat the voting again, Steve, please?
Absolutely. That is 432 against 29, 1 abstention.
Okay. Okay, so it's being carried out, yes. Is that right? Yep. Okay.
Correct, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve, for that. Yeah, it's just okay, everyone. Thank you for your contribution. Okay, I think we need to move on now. We move on to appointment of committees, section B, pages 493 to 500. I'm correct, Phil, is that right? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we were asked to agree to the formation of these committees set out in Part 3B of the Constitution and A, exempt from political balance requirements, the Constitution and Standards Committee at Section 14.1 of Part 3B and the Senior Officer Appointments and Staffing Subcommittee and Associated Subcommittee at Section 1.3 and 1.4 of Part 3B, and B, allocate seats on those remaining committees subject to political balance arrangements as set out in Appendix 1. 3, finally, we are asked to authorise the monitoring officer and proper officer to carry out the wishes of the leaders of political groups in allocating members to membership and substitute memberships of the committee or other authorities, and to appoint those members with effect from the date on which the proper officer is advised of the names of such members. There is an alteration to the second recommendation, and that is to add that due to recent sad events, the balance set out in Appendix 1 is to be agreed as an interim measure only, and that the Director of Law and Governance be authorised in consultation with the political group leaders to complete and review the representation of different political groups on the council as soon as practicable after this annual meeting. I will now move approval of the recommendations, including that addition. I call on Councillor Williamson to second.
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any amendments? No. Are there any speakers? No. Okay, thank you, members. I intend to separate out recommendation 1A because of the need to record that no member has voted against. The proposal is that the Constitution and Standards Committee at Section 14.1 of Part 3B and the Senior Officer Appointments and Staffing Subcommittee and Associated Subcommittee at Section 1.3 and 1.4 of Part 3B are made exempt from political balance requirements. When called, please turn on your camera and state clearly whether you are for, against, or wish to abstain. Phil, do you want to undertake a roll call of members again?
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Berry.
For.
Councillor Bird.
For.
Councillor Brain.
For.
Councillor Burgess Joyce.
4.
Councillor Cameron,
4.
Councillor Cannon,
4.
Councillor Carubia,
4.
Councillor Cleary,
4.
Councillor Clements,
You'll be asking Jim, him or me.
He will. Councillor Clements, 4.
Councillor Collins,
4.
Councillor Cook,
4.
Councillor Corkill,
4.
Councillor Cottier,
4.
Councillor Cox,
4.
Councillor Davies,
4.
Councillor Fowkes,
4.
Councillor Frost,
4.
Councillor Gardner,
4.
Councillor Gilchrist,
4.
Councillor Carl Greeny,
4.
Councillor Jeff Green,
Jeff Green voting 4.
Councillor Gray,
4.
Councillor Paul Hayes,
4.
Councillor Stephen Hayes,
4.
Councillor Andrew Hodson,
4.
Councillor Cathy Hodson,
4.
Councillor Johnson,
4.
Councillor Adrian Jones,
4.
Councillor Chris Jones,
4.
Councillor Sharon Jones,
4.
Councillor Tony Jones,
4.
Councillor Jordan,
4.
Councillor Kelly,
4.
Councillor Kenny,
4.
Councillor Leach,
Councillor Leach, 4.
Councillor Lewis,
Councillor Ian Lewis, 4.
Councillor McLaughlin,
Councillor Moira McLaughlin, 4.
Councillor McManus,
Councillor McManus, 4.
Councillor Mitchell,
4.
Councillor Muspratt,
4.
Councillor Nolan,
4.
Councillor Norbury,
4, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Povell,
4.
Councillor Rennie,
Councillor Rennie, 4.
Councillor Robinson,
4.
Councillor Rowlands,
Councillor Rowlands, 4.
Councillor Smith,
Abstain.
Councillor Spore,
4.
Councillor Spriggs,
4.
Councillor Stapleton, Councillor Stapleton,
Sorry, I was muted. 4.
Councillor Stewart,
Councillor Paul Stewart, 4.
Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Sullivan,
4.
Councillor Usher,
4.
Councillor Walsh,
4.
Councillor Whittingham,
4.
Councillor Irene Williams,
4.
Councillor Jerry Williams,
4.
Councillor Steve Williams,
Steve Williams, 4.
Councillor Williamson,
4.
Councillor Wood,
Councillor Wood, 4.
and Councillor Wright.
Alison Wright, 4.
Thank you, members.
Right, the voting for 61, against 0, abstentions 1. So that's been carried. Thank you, councillors. Right, the second vote is to agree the remainder of the proposals as I read out earlier. I'm going to take this vote by assent. So if any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to section C, appointment of chairs and vice chairs of committees. Right, now members, we're asked to appoint a leader of the council who will also be chair of the Policy and Resources Committee. Does anyone wish to make a nomination?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to make a nomination of Jeanette Williamson.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Do I have a seconder?
Seconded.
Yes, Mr Mayor, seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Usher. If there is no objection, can we agree the appointment by assent? If any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? Okay, that's agreed. Congratulations, Councillor Williamson. And I would like to invite you, Councillor Williamson, to make an acceptance speech.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you everyone tonight for your support. It's been a difficult week for the council this week and the borough. We've lost David Alderson and Geoffrey Watt. They were long-standing public servants who were held in high esteem by all members in this virtual chamber tonight, and I pass on my sincere condolences to their families. We've also lost two highly valued members of staff recently. Bernie Miller, who devoted 39 years of her life to keeping our town hall clean and safe. Thank you, Bernie, for everything that you did for the council. Mark Redman, who worked for the council for 34 years and was recently promoted to interim design and commission manager in highways services. I want to lay on record my thanks to you both for your devoted service to this council, and your loss will be felt by everyone. And to all the families that have lost a loved one during COVID, I'm so sorry for your loss. COVID has presented challenges to us as a council and a community which are unprecedented. It's impacted on all of our everyday lives. It's transformed the way we communicate and operate. With further restrictions in place locally and winter on its way, we're calling on residents to make even more sacrifices, and we know that that's really difficult for them. We know COVID has affected the vulnerable the most. We know it's decimated our communities, and that over 31,000 people have been furloughed on Wirral, that redundancies are imminent and health inequalities have worsened. We know that our small independent businesses, the lifeblood of our economy, are struggling, and we've seen a steep increase in domestic violence during lockdown. But we will be here to support you. We will help our vulnerable and our businesses and our communities. We will wrap our arms around you. We will come through this together. My vision as a leader is to reduce the inequalities on Wirral that have been there for far too long. We must tackle the growing divide between the affluent and those least well off. We must ensure that a resident's postcode in Wirral does not dictate their life chances, their health and their well-being. We must ensure that those 8,000 school children on Wirral without internet access and outdoor space during lockdown are not left behind in a society where social mobility has now become all but an academic discussion. The role of local councils has never been more important to our citizens' lives. We've distributed over 17,000 food parcels since March. We've helped 4,700 businesses. We have strengthened our support for victims of domestic violence and domestic abuse. We've provided additional resources for test and trace. We will wrap our arms around our community. We will demand that the government recognises the role of local councils and gives us the respect, acknowledgement and funding that is required to look after our residents. And we know that all parties in this virtual chamber tonight will also make that ask of the government. Now is the time to work together for the good of our residents. It's not a time for personal attacks or cheap politics. We move to a new system of governance as from tonight. It's no longer an option to avoid participating in tough decisions. We've all been trusted by our residents who voted for us to behave with integrity and compassion. And so, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to finish by saying I really value everyone's support here tonight, and I won't let you down. My virtual door or physical door is always open to everyone. And I'd just like to say that as a public servant, to paraphrase Nelson Mandela, our existence is not just defined by us being here, it's defined by what we do for other people. And that's what I try to live by. Thank you all again. Your support is really important to me. And let's just build our way out of COVID and get this borough up and running and open for business. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williamson.
Thank you,
Okay.
whoever did that. I appreciate that solitary whoop.
We're asked now to appoint a deputy leader of the council who will also be vice chair of the Policy and Resources Committee. Does anyone wish to make a nomination?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Anita Leach.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williamson. Do we have a seconder?
Mr. Mayor, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Usher. If there's no objection, can we agree the appointment by assent? If any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? No, okay, so Councillor Anita Leach as Deputy Leader of the Council. Okay, thank you. Okay, we move on now to chairs and vice chairs. So we're asked to appoint chairs and vice chairs for all other council committees other than those which the council has decided should be appointed by the committee itself. A list was circulated to members in the supplementary agenda pack. Okay, I now call on Councillor Jeanette Williamson to move the recommendation circulated.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Call Councillor Leach. Yeah.
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay. So if Councillor, so have we got someone, Councillor Ian Lewis. Ian, do you want to say something, amend the?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I may, in view of the result of the vote for item 6A as amended, the Conservative group is required now to amend our nomination for appointment of the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, and right. I will be proposing that instead of Councillor Jeff Green, because he will be serving on the Policy and Resources Committee as the Conservative group spokesman, and Leslie Rennie will be seconding that Councillor Cathy Hodson is appointed chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. Other than that, Mr. Mayor, there are no other amendments to the list as circulated, and I'll put that in the box now, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Can we have a seconder, please, Ian?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm willing to second that.
Sorry, who's that?
Sorry, Councillor Leslie Rennie is...
oh, Leslie, okay. Thank you, Leslie, yeah. Okay, so understand it now. Do we need to move on to a debate on that, or Phil, can you guide me on this?
Mr. Mayor, you now have a list as amended. I'm presuming it is a group nomination. The mover of the motion may just want to say that it's formally accepted and then go to vote by assent.
Okay, right. Can I ask Councillor Jeanette Williamson, you willing to accept that, Councillor Williamson?
Yes, thank you. Agreed.
Okay. And on that basis, then, can we move on to so accept the amended names given and the decision on the composition of the membership. Does everyone agree on that? Can we agree that by assent, please? Yes? Okay.
Agreed, Mr. Mayor.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, thanks everyone. Right. Right. We now move on to. I know we've time. Is it section D? Yeah, calendar of meetings for 2020 to 2021, pages 501 to 514. So we're asked to approve a programme of ordinary meetings of the council for the year 2020 to 2021. I will move approval. Can I call on Councillor Pat Cleary to second, please?
Yes, seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'll take this vote by assent. So if any member is not in agreement with the proposal, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. Move on to section E, which is appointments and nomination to other bodies and organisations. So members, we are asked, one, to appoint or nominate, as the case may be, members, officers or others as appropriate to represent the council on various outside organisations. Two, to authorise the proper officer in respect of any appointments not made at this annual meeting to carry out the wishes of the committee, or in relation to appointments or nomination of several members to a body, the leaders of political groups, and to appoint those members or persons with effect from the date at which the proper officer is advised, and their names. So a list has been circulated to members of unopposed nominations to outside bodies. In addition, I have been notified that in respect of the Transport Committee of the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, we have had a nomination from the Liberal Democrat Group to appoint Councillor Mitchell, and from the Green Group to appoint Councillor Cleary. As we have at least two nominees for the vacancy to that committee, I propose to have a separate vote in accordance with section 17.6 of the Constitution when we have determined the other appointments. I have not had notice of any further nominations contesting this list. Are there any further nominations? No. I now call on Councillor Jeanette Williamson to move the recommendations with the exclusion of the final place on the Transport Committee. Councillor Williamson.
Sorry, so moved, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I now call on Councillor Leach to second.
Councillor Leach, seconding, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Williamson, you now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Mr. Mayor, can I beg your indulgence? My screen is frozen completely. It frozen a few minutes ago, so I'm trying to rectify that at the minute.
Right.
I do beg your pardon.
Yeah. You want us to just hold on a minute then? Yes, okay, we'll wait.
I can't actually view anything.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, a number of us have been asking whether there would be possibility of a comfort break, as some of us have been on our screens for hours on end.
Oh, okay, right.
This might be a timely moment.
Okay, then, can I propose then a four people happy with 5 minute break?
Yes, that would be of great assistance.
Okay, we'll have a
Thank
5 minute break. Okay, thank you. Councillor Williamson, you have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take the 5 minutes. I am just happy to support the nominations that are presented before members tonight.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williamson. We have a debate now. Are there any speakers? If so, you have 3 minutes to address the council. No? No, okay. Can we now move on to the seconder of the motion? Councillor Leach, you now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to second the motion. I'd just really like to wish those who are continuing in this role best of luck, and for those of you new to these positions, also the very best of luck, and I fully support the nominations.
Okay, thank you. And now back to right of reply. Councillor Williamson, proposer of the motion. Do you wish to?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything else to add except to support Councillor Leach. We do endorse the names on this, the names of the members on this list, and we have full confidence in their skills and abilities to continue in their roles or to embark on new roles if it's new for them.
Thank you very much. Thanks. I will now take the vote to agree the appointments detailed in the report by assent, with the exception of the final appointment to the Transport Committee of the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, which we will consider next. If any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. We will now move to the vote on the final appointment to the Transport Committee of the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. I would like to invite Councillor Phil Gilchrist to propose Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I propose Councillor Mitchell in view of his many years' service to the council and past experience on Mersey travel. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Corubia to second.
So seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I would like to invite Councillor Cook to propose Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I propose Councillor Cleary for the position.
And I call on Councillor Cleary to second.
Duly seconded, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other nominations to this position? In that case, Councillor Jeff Green.
Jeff. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'd be delighted to know I'm not proposing anyone for the position. However, I did want some advice. As you know, I think I heard Councillor Cleary and Labour members saying how important it was that we followed advice. And I think the Liverpool City Region and Mersey Travel would be considered trustworthy bodies, I suppose. And given Councillor Cleary has to find a way of seconding himself with regards to this, what's the situation with regards to political balance in terms of the nominations that we send to Mersey Travel? And I wondered if Mr. McCourt had received any advice from Mersey Travel in terms of that advice.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Green. Phil, can you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been the subject of discussion between myself and the monitoring officer at the Combined Authority. There are several committees to the Combined Authority. Some of those are part of the order establishing the Combined Authority. This is not one of those. This is an advisory committee established by the Combined Authority Mayor. So it's entirely up to the Combined Authority Mayor to say who he wants to be on this committee. The way he has handled that is simply to express a desire of a set number of members to each of the constituent authorities, and then said beyond that it's a matter for each constituent authority to send its own people. There's no comment there about expectation or requirement of political balance, and that's the view of Mrs. Cool, the monitoring officer of the Combined Authority, as well as myself.
So just so I'm clear, Mr. Mayor, there's been no advice in terms of from anyone connected with Mersey travel, etc., that it should be done on the basis of the normal proportionality in terms of the way we've done these things historically. Is that right?
Phil?
Mr. Mayor, that's the advice given to me by their monitoring officer. That's their formal legal view.
Okay, Jeff. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Phil.
Sorry,
Okay.
thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay. As there are no other nominations, in that case, we'll move to the vote. So again, when called, please turn your camera and microphone and state the name of the councillor you wish to appoint. And Phil McCourt will now undertake a roll call of members. Okay, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Anderson.
Tom Anderson voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Berry.
Councillor Roosberry voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Bird.
Councillor Bird voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Brame. Councillor Brame.
Sorry, I just, perhaps I was muted. Councillor Brame voting for Dave Mitchell.
Thank you. Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce voting for Dave Mitchell. Thank you.
Councillor Cameron.
Councillor Helen Cameron voting for Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Cannon.
Councillor Cannon voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Carubier.
Councillor Carubier voting for Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Cleary voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Clements. Councillor Clements.
Sorry, Councillor Clements voting for Councillor Dave Mitchell.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Councillor Collins voting for Councillor Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Cook.
Councillor Cook voting for Councillor Pat Cleary.
Councillor Corkill.
Andy Corkill for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Cottier.
Councillor Cottier voting for Councillor Pat Cleary.
Councillor Cox.
Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Davies.
George Davies voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Fowkes.
Sorry, Councillor Fowkes voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Frost.
Councillor Frost voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Gardner.
Councillor Gardner voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Councillor Gilchrist voting for Councillor Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Carl Greeny.
Councillor Greeny voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Jeff Green.
Councillor Jeff Green voting for Councillor Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Gray.
Councillor Gray voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Paul Hayes.
Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Stephen Hayes.
Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
Voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Cathy Hodson.
Councillor Cathy Hodson voting for Councillor Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
For Pat Cleary.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Pat Cleary.
Councillor Sharon Jones.
Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Tony Jones.
Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Jordan.
Councillor Mary Jordan voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Kelly.
Voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Kenny.
Councillor Brian Kenny voting for Councillor Pat Cleary.
Councillor Leach.
Councillor Anita Leach voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Lewis.
Ian Lewis voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Councillor Moore McLaughlin voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor McManus.
Councillor McManus voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Mitchell voting for Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Muspratt.
But Arsenal are good at this. Yeah, and then it's the first time they've got away.
Councillor Christina Muspratt. Are you?
I'd be muted. Councillor Muspratt voting for Councillor Pat Cleary.
Thank you, Councillor Muspratt. Thank you, Councillor Nolan.
Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Norbury.
Voting for Councillor Cleary, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Povell.
Councillor Cherry Povell voting for Councillor Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Leslie Rennie voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Robinson.
Councillor Robinson voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Rowlands voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Smith.
Abstaining.
Councillor Spore.
Sarah Spore voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Spriggs.
Councillor Christine Spriggs voting for Councillor Pat Cleary.
Councillor Stapleton.
Jean Stapleton voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart voting for Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mike Sullivan voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Usher.
Councillor Usher voting for Councillor Pat Cleary.
Councillor Walsh.
Councillor Walsh voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Whittingham.
Councillor Whittingham vote for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Irene Williams.
Councillor Irene Williams voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
Councillor Jerry Williams voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Steve Williams voting for Dave Mitchell.
Councillor Williamson.
Jeanette Williamson voting for Pat Cleary.
Councillor Wood.
Councillor Wood voting for Councillor Cleary.
And Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright voting for Dave Mitchell.
Thank you, members.
Okay, the voting was as follows. Councillor Pat Cleary 33, Councillor David Mitchell 28 and 1 abstention. So it's agreed that Councillor Pat Cleary is appointed. Thank you very much, councillors. Okay, we now move on to members' allowance scheme, pages 531 to 546. Members, the final item this evening is to approve the proposed members' allowance scheme on pages 531 to 546 of the agenda pack. As this is an independent report to be debated, I will move the recommendations and ask the Deputy Mayor to second to enable it to be debated. Councillor George Davis. Can you second it, George?
Seconded, no problem, Tony. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I also am aware of an amendment submitted by Councillor Cleary and seconded by Councillor Cook. So before inviting the councillors to move his amendment, I'm going to come out with something that we just did previously. If I can just get my papers together here. Just give me a moment, please. Apologise to everyone. I thought I had this all in hand, but as the evening has gone on, I've moved my papers around. Perhaps I can be given some guidance by Phil. Phil, can you? Right, amendment. Is it similar to the amendments we made previously, Phil? Debate on this.
Mr. Mayor, it's yes, exactly the same as earlier. So the main item has been proposed. The debate would now be on the amendment. So you are inviting the councillors to move and second their amendment, to speak to them at debate. You have a right of reply at the end as the mover, should you wish to use it, and then a vote on the amendment before returning to either the original or substantive motion.
Thank you. Okay. Can I have Councillor Cleary, do you wish to propose the amendment?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. So proposed.
Okay. And could it be seconded by Councillor Cook, please?
Yes, I'll be seconding the. I'll second the amendment.
Okay, I've got a hand raised. Could I see who it was, please? No?
Mr. Mayor, it's me, Jeanette.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether this is the right time that the Labour Group also has an amendment. Shall we allow Councillor Cleary's amendment to be debated first?
I think that's what we agreed previously. Is that right, Phil?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. This amendment was previously submitted and circulated and is on the list first. So once this amendment has been disposed of, either become part of the motion or not, then a further amendment can be moved.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Right. Okay. Can I ask Councillor Cleary to speak on his amendment, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And firstly, can I thank those members who gave me their support in the previous item. It's much appreciated. Thank you all. Mr. Mayor, this amendment seeks to correct an obvious anomaly in the proposed special responsibility allowances, namely the relatively very large allowance suggested for members of the Liverpool City Region Transport Committee. This was raised as part of the consultation process conducted by the remuneration panel. The response was that every other Liverpool City Regional Authority pays this amount, so the panel recommends that we should do the same. And Mr. Mayor, I don't agree with this. We should not be endorsing inappropriate allowances, even if others choose to do so. We should be setting the right example, and that is what the public would want us to do. Now more than ever, Mr. Mayor, we need to be financially prudent. The Transport Committee is essentially a forum for councillors to listen to and question officers from Mersey Travel and invited guests. It has no real power. Its meeting last Thursday was the first in 7 months. Our Director of Law, as you heard earlier, has confirmed that, and I quote, the Transport Committee has the status of an advisory committee appointed by the City Region. Mr. Mayor, nobody, I feel, could reasonably argue that a member of this body should receive substantially more than, for example, the chair of Wirral's Planning Committee. In the absence of any meaningful powers, the current allowances for Transport Committee members are not, in my view, justifiable. So the meeting schedule and the remit of the Transport Committee is similar to that of the Merseyside Recycling and Waste Authority. It is appropriate, therefore, that their respective allowances should align, and this is what my amendment calls for. The savings resulting from this amendment, if passed, could go a long way in addressing the additional shortcomings in the Remuneration Panel's report, specifically the lack of an allowance for vice chairs on the Policy and Services Committees and the unfair allocation of allowances for leaders and deputies of the smaller groups. So, Mr. Mayor, I hope that members will recognise that this is an anomaly and this amendment gives them the chance to correct that. So I would urge them to support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. Okay, I think I'm right now. We open that for debate. Is that correct, Will? Yeah?
Yes, Mayor.
Yeah. Okay, members. Okay, I see one hand already. Councillor Phil Gilchrist. Phil.
I had established by looking at minutes of the transport body, given that we're in difficult COVID circumstances, I can appreciate that they have met physically. What I'm interested in is what job the transport committee members can do for us. We have last year expressed concern about the reorganisation of the system and making the transport system work for the people. In order to be familiar with the transport system, I expect the Transport Committee members to devote time to studying it and studying the gaps in it. Therefore, I see it as an important role for them. Therefore, if they do need to take time off work or do need to make time to go and carry out their jobs properly without necessarily relying on meetings, there's an investigative work to be done. Therefore, I think this is a rather strange move that might discourage members across the authorities from doing the full work on this project. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Have we got any other speakers? Councillor David Burgess-Joyce. David.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too always have that concern about us looking like we are voting to give ourselves some sort of a remuneration increase. And I never think it sits very well with the public and certainly possibly the public watching today that we look like we are supporting in our own stead. I appreciate that this has been arranged and agreed and summated by an independent body. So in that respect, I obviously take forward what figures are on Schedule 1, which we have here. I think what the public would probably want to know is, do the figures in Schedule 1 increase substantially the overall pay bill? And if it doesn't, then we're probably okay, but I still take the point that we may need to just be very, very careful about looking like we are voting in our own stead. It is an independent review. We accept it, and I certainly accept that. But I wonder if somebody could give me the answer, and certainly the public the answer, as to whether, in fact, there's a huge increase in the costs going forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. We'll ask someone to come back on that, David. Councillor Mara McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this is not something that I was going to comment on. However, I think we're getting into very dangerous territory if we start to look at allowances ourselves rather than taking the judgment of the remuneration panel. Having said that, I absolutely agree with the points that Pat Cleary has made, and I'm sure that he made those points when he made his submission to the remuneration panel. But as was said, when we started to look at the Constitution, and there was some misunderstanding, I remember at that first meeting, that part of our remit was going to be to look at the remuneration, and we made it very clear, those of us who were part of the committee and part of the working party, that we would have nothing to do with the remuneration that we receive. And I think we're going into dangerous territory if we start to move away from that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tony Cox. Tony. Councillor Cox. No? Once again, Councillor Cox, you had your hand up. Do you want to say something? No? Okay. We did have that, Councillor David Burgess, Josh. David, do you want to come in again? No?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. I'll put my hand down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tony, up again, your hand. No? Not there. Okay, no other contributions then.
Thinking Councillor Lewis had his hand up, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Lewis. I've just seen your hand going up now. Okay, Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. 2 points I'd like to ask, Mr. Mayor. Do we have any indication as to what the additional cost would be to the borough if we were to introduce allowances for vice chairs, as is proposed by the Green Party? And secondly, as we have now only just been given sight of the Labour amendment, could I ask that we adjourn for 5 or 10 minutes to consider it, please?
Okay. Yes, okay then, I'll agree. Could we, would 5 minutes be sufficient to have a look at? I know we've had a long evening, but would 5 minutes be acceptable, Councillor Lewis?
Looking at the way that the technology and the groups have worked tonight, Mr. Mayor, probably not. But I would like maybe to ask the monitoring officer first before we do adjourn, if any calculation has been done on the additional cost to the borough of introducing payments for vice chairs, which are not currently in the system under the scheme of delegation.
Okay. Phil, could you come in on that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So, no, we, as far as I'm aware, not been approached as to any further cost or calculations for referral back to the remuneration panel. And on the adjournment, Mr. Mayor, can I suggest we continue and deal with this amendment, and then before you go on to receive and deal with the next amendment, there is that adjournment.
Okay. Yes,
concur
okay.
with Councillor Lewis that with technology being what it is, that should be at least 10 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to respond, Mr. Mayor. Could the monitoring officer also answer Councillor Burgess Joyce's point in terms of the overall cost of the scheme as it currently is and what it would be under the proposed new scheme?
Okay. Can you come back on that, Phil?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there is some passage to it in the report. I haven't got the paragraph to refer to you directly, but it is approximately the same cost, the previous scheme and the current scheme. It's a matter of £1,000 or something like that, if all allowances were claimed, and of course there are several allowances that will be held for posts held by the same person, so wouldn't. So it would roughly work out at the same cost as the current scheme.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Okay, is that acceptable then? We'll continue with debate on this amendment. So I'm asking Councillor, is it Councillor Chris Cook? Is it Chris? Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor McLaughlin in the box has asked if you may comment.
Right, I don't seem to be getting these coming up on mine.
Mr. Mayor, I made my comment. You called me and I made my comment.
I thought so, yes, I thought so, yeah. No one else, trying to be fair here. Right, the seconder of the motion was Councillor Chris Cook, was it? Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
ahead,
I think that, yes, the issue of the Transport Committee, I think, has been debated sufficiently. So I'd just like to make 2 main points in support of our amendment. The first concerns the discriminatory proposed allowances for leaders of smaller groups, which are not even politically proportionate. given that we're aspiring towards greater equality in all our endeavours as a council, as referenced in the remuneration panel report itself, and indeed in all committee papers and reports. The principles on which allowances are based need to be fit for the future, given that normally they are reviewed only every 4 years. The proposed scheme isn't even adequate for the present situation, as electoral fortunes can change significantly even within 1 year, as indeed they have done recently. Also, I'd like to say that reference in the report of the remuneration panel to minority parties is inappropriate, as technically all parties other than the largest Labour group are minorities. The word minorities is usually used in the context of defending the rights of certain groups within society. Here it is used dismissively. Even politically proportionate allowances for group leaders could be disputed as unfair, given that leaders of all groups, however small, have to take part in certain regular meetings, currently held twice weekly, including the COVID-19 Outbreak Management Board. So in terms of workload, leaders of smaller groups don't do significantly less work in this respect than those of the larger groups. My second point is with regard to there being no special allowance provision for vice chairs, which is also blatantly unfair. It states in paragraph 11.5 of the Constitution that the role of the vice chair is to assist the chair in carrying out their role and responsibilities as set out in 11.3 and 11.4. These paragraphs list about 10 different duties, as well as chairing meetings where necessary in the absence of the chair. To summarise, I refer back to the blatant discrimination against smaller groups and how disappointing this is, given that this flaw was raised by the members with the panel who were provided with the job descriptions for the chair and vice chair of the committees, but nevertheless didn't act upon this. This situation wouldn't stand up to scrutiny in an industrial tribunal. Yes, anomalies could be corrected at the planned review next year, but let's not use that as an excuse for not getting it right now. So to conclude, I would ask members to support our amendments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Within the time, Chris. Okay, as there are no, can I right of reply, the proposer of the original motion, Pat Cleary. Pat. 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of additional comments, really. I mean, I don't think anybody in the few people who spoke actually addressed the fundamental problem in terms of the current scheme of allowances and the fact that the payments to the Transport Committee members are clearly an outlier. Nobody really picked that up. I mean, Councillor Gilchrist mentioned that councillors might want to do a bit of work outside of the committee time to look at certain things. Well, they might, and I'm sure we would all encourage them to do so. But it doesn't change the fact that this is a body with no powers. Okay, it is purely advisory. Okay, I've also made the point in my speech and in the amendment that there is clear alignment between the duties.
Pat, can I just stop you? Sorry, I know this is not proper really, but
you're going to tell me I've got no right to speak now.
Yes, I followed it. I've been trying to be fair. It's on amendments. There's not a right to respond. So it's my fault again. I'm trying to be, you know, sort of looking at when it was the original motion and that.
Okay,
so,
Mr. Mayor, but obviously members now haven't heard the full debate, but there you go. Okay, I'll leave it there, thank
you. We have heard it quite a lot.
Indeed,
okay.
Indeed.
Okay, now, with no further speakers, I'll move to the vote on the amendment. So the amendment proposed by Councillor Cleary and seconded by Councillor Cook. When called, please turn on your mic, on your cameras and state clearly whether you are for, against, or wish to abstain. Okay, Phil, do you want to Take a roll call again of members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Anderson.
Against.
Councillor Berry.
Against.
Councillor Bird.
Against.
Councillor Brain.
Against.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
Against.
Councillor Cameron.
Against.
Councillor Cannon.
Against.
Councillor Carubia.
Against.
Councillor Cleary.
For.
Councillor Clements.
Against.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Cook.
For.
Councillor Corkill.
Against.
Councillor Cottier.
Against.
Councillor Cox.
Against.
Councillor Davies.
Against.
Councillor Fawkes.
Against.
Councillor Frost.
Against.
Councillor Gardner.
Against.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Against.
Councillor Carl Greeny.
Against.
Councillor Jeff Green.
Against.
Councillor Gray.
Against.
Councillor Paul Hayes.
Against.
Councillor Stephen Hayes.
Against.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
Against.
Councillor Kathy Hodson.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
Against.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Against.
Councillor Sharon Jones.
Against.
Councillor Tony Jones.
Against.
Councillor Jordan.
Against.
Councillor Kelly.
Against.
Councillor Kenny.
Against.
Councillor Leach.
Councillor Leach against.
Councillor Lewis.
Councillor Lewis. Against.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Councillor Murray McLaughlin, abstain.
Councillor McManus.
Against.
Councillor Mitchell.
Against.
Councillor Muspratt. Councillor Muspratt. I'm sorry, Councillor Muspratt. Couldn't hear that.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Muspratt. Councillor Nolan.
Against.
Councillor Norbury.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Povell.
Against.
Councillor Rennie.
Against.
Councillor Robinson.
Against.
Councillor Rowlands.
Against.
Councillor Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Spall.
Against.
Councillor Spriggs.
Against.
Councillor Stapleton.
Against.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart. Against.
Councillor Sullivan.
Against.
Councillor Usher.
Against.
Councillor Walsh.
Against.
Councillor Whittingham.
Against.
Councillor Irene Williams.
Against.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
Against.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Steve Williams. Against.
Councillor Williamson.
Against.
Councillor Wood. Councillor Wood.
Sorry, the sticky key. Against.
And Councillor Wright.
Against.
Thank you, members.
Okay, the voting as follows. against 58, for 2, and abstentions 2. So that has been lost, that amendment. Okay, right. We have agreed a 10-minute break, and can we? It's 8:55 now. Can we come back at 9:05? Okay, 9:05. Thank you, everyone. Okay, members' allowance scheme, and we've got a second amendment from the Labour group. Can I call on Councillor Williamson to move the amendment?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
And have I got a seconder?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Leach. Okay. Right, the proposer of the amendment, Councillor Williamson, you have 3 minutes to speak to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take the 3 minutes. This is a relatively straightforward argument for us in the Labour group. We are currently facing financial challenges in the council like we've never seen before. We have some decisions coming before us as a council which are not going to be easy, and whilst we will always continue our pressure on the government to support us financially, we are aware that the reality of the situation we're in will not be pleasant for our residents, and so therefore we don't think currently it's right to accept the 5% increase in our basic allowances. We do appreciate the work that the independent remuneration panel have done on this, but currently we think that in line with what a lot of our residents are experiencing at the minute, we feel that we will decline on the 5% increase. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I'm going to open to debate on the amendment only, and vote before we turn to the original motion as amended or otherwise. Okay, right. Can I have Councillor Phil Gilchrist first of all? Phil, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Unable to unmute, Mr. Mayor. Not sure how
We
to
can
get.
hear you now.
Now I've done it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry for the delay.
No.
The independent panel was meeting in February to April and produced their report. When they produced the report, now our original view was, of course, we must accept independent panels and independent advice. Of course, since April, the world has changed substantially. As we've just heard, many of our residents will face hardship like they have not faced for a number of years, furlough schemes and difficulties with managing with reduced hours. In those circumstances, and given the council's financial position, which will become clearer to the public shortly, I'm prepared on behalf of my colleagues to say that we will accept what Councillor Williamson is moving as leader of the council. It sends the right signal from the council to the members of the public, and it understands the financial situation and leaves us to do what we can for the public of Wirral in whatever ways we can as a council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Councillor Mara McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I don't disagree with the sentiment of this notice of motion, and I'm sure that there isn't a family associated with this council that hasn't had either a member of the family who's had the COVID virus or who have been financially disadvantaged by the presence of it. And I do absolutely recognise the serious nature of the financial situation of the council. However, in the interest of consistency, I will not be voting. I'll be abstaining in this because I do believe the remuneration panel, who have met since and reviewed recommendations, and this report has been known to us for quite a few months, and to get an amendment right on the last minute, I think, is a difficult situation for us to have. It's the second time this evening that's happened. But on the grounds of consistency, I will be abstaining on this vote too.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tony Norbury. Tony?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I totally agree with the Labour Party amendment. We are in a coronavirus crisis. The government, the council is absolutely strapped for cash. The work of our humanitarian hub has been absolutely tremendous. I'm sure we've been involved in volunteering to get people food parcels and also medications in a time of absolute crisis. This crisis has hit our communities, our communities, particularly in the east of Wirral, Birkenhead, Seacombe, and areas of Rock Ferry and New Ferry, are suffering through austerity. 10 years of Tory austerity have forced these communities to be vulnerable to this pandemic. I don't think the advice from the government has helped either. Regarding this, it's been mixed, confusing, very confusing, and the way this has been managed. We've already got 60,000 deaths from coronavirus and growing, one of the worst figures throughout the world. So all our funding, all our pennies should go towards fighting for our vulnerable communities. And I totally agree, as I said, with the Labour amendment. We cannot take 5% pay rises in this situation. It's just not ethical. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to finish off, Mr. Mayor, it's very important to me and the Labour group as well that we have equality and diversity within our council. So we agree with the sentiments of the independent panel, and we agree that councillors should get an allowance because we want councillors to be elected and put themselves forward from all walks of society, whatever their circumstances are. So hopefully sometime in the future, when things are better for the people of the Wirral, we will be able to take that equality and diversity and bring people into the council, as I say, from all walks of life. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Councillor Ian Lewis. Ian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I, in terms of the comments regarding the amendment, like Councillor McLaughlin, it's a shame it's taken the Labour group 4 months to put this in, at 20 minutes before it was due to be voted on, but hey-ho, we are where we are. Mr. Mayor, I would be keen to see that the proposal that the Conservative group submitted to the independent panel, in that there are no further above inflation increases to councillors' allowances, in that the future increases or otherwise of councillors' allowances are linked to the pay of council staff, so that we no longer have the spectacle of councillors voting to increase their own salary is adopted, regardless of whether Labour's amendment is passed or not this evening.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Councillor Adrian Jones. Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just feel inclined to reflect back a little bit. Some of us were councillors, or willing to be councillors, before ever there were such payments as we have been receiving for the last 10 or 15 years. And when I was a councillor in another place in the 1980s, I can't actually remember having an allowance. There must have been something, but it was so small that you wouldn't account it as anything in the nature of an income. But at a time when COVID-driven pressures are looking to result in unprecedented hardships for many of those we represent, I mean, it seems to me it might be thought even rather shameful for us to accept significant increases. So my inclination is simply to say we shouldn't have anything to do with it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jones. And I'll call on Councillor Yvonne Nolan. Yvonne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just to support the Labour amendment, I absolutely echo the those councillors who have pointed out the importance of councillors having some remuneration in respect of the work that we do. And it is important because it does enable people, not just people who have an independent income or who have their own businesses or who are retired, to become councillors, but it enables people from many walks of life to become councillors, and that's important. But right now, we're in situations that we've never been in before. And this is not to say that councillors are not worth the money that they get. Of course we are. The amount of work that many councillors put in, the remuneration probably doesn't even reflect anything like the work we do. But then that's true of an awful lot of people now, particularly, who are not getting the remunerations that they deserve for the jobs that they do. We see that right across our health and care sector. And we're seeing people now, particularly in areas such as hospitality, leisure, travel industry, who are furloughed and who are losing their jobs and who will have no income at all and no jobs. And so I don't think at this moment in time we can be seen to be taking additional money for ourselves. I think we have to be seen to lead our local community, to support the local community. As Councillor Williamson said very eloquently in her acceptance speech, we need to be the leaders and the supporters of our local community, and putting money in our own pockets is not the way to set out at our AGM, convincing people that we're able to do that. So I strongly support the amendment moved by Councillor Williamson. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nolan. Councillor Pat Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make one point, and it relates to our previous debate on our amendment. And there was a clear opportunity there for councillors to address an obvious inconsistency in the scheme of remuneration as tabled in front of us. And every party other than the Green Party rejected that. We could have corrected that. We could have sent a clear signal to the public that yes, here is an anomaly. We will address it by changing the scheme of allowances. And now I have to listen to councillors telling me that we can possibly take a pay rise. There's an obvious inconsistency there, Mr. Mayor, and I think that's plain to see for everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Jeff Green. Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think the difference, Councillor Cleary, is that the proposal you made would have actually increased the overall cost. And of course, as has been pointed out by Ian and others, that this year, financially, from what I can tell, we're picking up, the Labour Party would know they've been in control of the council for some time, managing the finances. So they would know what sort of hole they've put us all in. So, so in terms of that, we will have to reduce, certainly, the overall cost of councillors' allowance. I think the sad thing about this, and again, Ian pointed to this, that when there's something that would be so obviously be agreed by everybody, to actually try and throw it in as a bit of a stunt is a shame. I mean, I can recall back in 2010, we as an administration at that time moved that we should reduce the allowances. And I think the Labour Party kicked off, said it was outrageous, how dare we, and why didn't they speak to us, and why weren't we following advice? It just seems to me so clear, as the discussion has gone tonight, that we're all, that we would all agree. I just wonder why, you know, the new leadership of the council didn't decide to take us all into their confidence and say, why don't we all come together and show that level of commitment? And I do hope, when you think how inclusive Pat Hackett had been as leader of the council and the way that he'd involved people and everyone had worked together, I do hope the way this has been done tonight with sort of last minute amendments and and so on doesn't presage a return back to the bad old days that got us into some of these financial straits in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chris Carubia. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to put some comments on record, really, with regards to this remuneration. And I'd like to state that I do agree with the proposal that we don't take this rise. But I just wanted to put a couple of points in to make people aware, because there will be members of the public watching. I remember prior to the independent group looking at this, there was a task and finish group that were charged with looking at council allowances across the UK. I'd just like to point out that we did take a cut in our council allowances, 2012. We are paid the lowest amount in all councils across the country in the percentile group, and we also, each councillor has the largest amount of residents per councillor in most of the councils. So we have more work to do, and we take less money. I'm not saying this to be, aren't we great as councillors and all the rest of it, but I think it's just fair to say that we are in the position that we're in right now, able not to take that 5% increase, although it was done via an independent group based on those figures from the rest of the country, purely because of COVID and everything else. But just to put into context what we're talking about as councillors and the amount of money or remuneration that is given to councillors, we are not by any means up there in the highest. In fact, we're lower than everybody else in the country. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I've now got Councillor Julie McManus. Julie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is directed to Councillor Green. To me, Councillor Green, this is not about scoring cheap political points. How could any of us vote for an increase in our allowance when most of our borough, most of our residents are really struggling at the moment with the effects of COVID and the problems that's caused them? Today, I spoke to a resident who was asking to access support to feed her family. She and her partner had not eaten in the last few days so that she could feed her children. And this was while she was waiting for universal credit claim to come through. And we know that many, many people in our borough will suffer because of the universal credit scheme. Today she spoke to me in desperation. She told me that she felt ashamed and that she had no other option as she'd now started running out of food for her children. And we were able to sort something out for her. But to be quite honest, how could I look at myself in the mirror if I voted for an allowance increase this evening when an awful lot of our residents in the borough will be suffering because of COVID and because they'll be losing jobs, because they've been furloughed, because they've been reduced to part-time hours, and universal credit, of course, doesn't kick in, as we know, as quickly as it should do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I've now got two more people. Councillor Jeanette Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just a very brief response, really, to Councillor Green. I'm not entirely sure why he thinks that we are going through a second spike of COVID. We have come to the conclusion in the Labour group that it would be unconscionable to accept a 5% increase in our allowances. I'm not sure why he perceives that to be a bad thing that we have concluded that. Apologies that this was...
Jeanette, can I just stop you? I do apologise about this.
I'm not allowed to speak, am I?
No, you've already spoken. And it's
okay,
not
no worries.
Meeting. I've gone through about 10, so I'll have to stop.
It's okay. It's all right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I've got, finally, Councillor Tom Usher. Tom.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make a couple of comments on members' remuneration, really, which is that the Labour position is obviously sympathetic to some of the things that many people did not expect to have to go through, and are now finding themselves in, unemployment, precarious working positions and stuff like that. I also want to say that when we don't get remuneration right for councillors, it forces some people who would want to be councillors to choose not to go down that particular route. And if we don't get remuneration right for councillors, then it actually devalues the quality of representation that our residents are entitled to. And that there's not a clear separation between local councillors and the local community. When I'm not a local councillor, I'm a support worker on minimum wage. And I know that I've certainly got experience of 0 hours contracts. And I know that many of my colleagues are certainly not what you would call born with a silver spoon in their mouths. So I imagine that there are many, many individuals who are in a position much like that of mine or some of my colleagues who decide because of remuneration that they just can't make the financial sacrifices to go on and represent their communities, which is a very sad fact indeed. But as I say, we are seeing throughout our communities a very pernicious trend caused by COVID, and the Labour position is meant to show solidarity and understanding of some of the hardships that people in our communities are going through.
Okay, thank you. Right, this is certainly the last contribution. I think we've given everyone a good chance. Councillor Mike Sullivan. Mike. No, I'm not taking any more after Mike.
Thanks.
Had a long enough.
I'd just like to reiterate what Tony Norbury said earlier on, and then what Tom's just said, and Julie McManus. This COVID has highlighted within our society the great divides, the racial divides, the poor. We've seen the debacle of this government who tried to tackle this pernicious killing virus. The billions, not millions, but the billions that have been wasted. Money that's going to Dominic Cummings, Michael Gove's friends. We've spent over £1 billion on track and trace, which this Prime Minister promised would be well beating, and it's still not working. We've got over 1 million students gone back to university, and a lot of them are locked in their rooms and can't get access to food. Now, it's not just a question of, and I agree with what Tom said, we don't want to dispar people, particularly who are on lower incomes, who are really struggling anyway. But there's no way we can vote. I totally agree with the Labour amendment. There's no way at this time can we vote for this 5% pay rise. I think councillors certainly who do the job properly should be paid more, in my opinion. But don't let's forget the money that local governments have lost since 2010. We've got a welfare state now, which a Labour government, the best government this country's had since the Second World War, brought when we were bankrupt. This country was bankrupt after the Second World War, and the Attlee government brought in the NHS, which now is not fit for purpose.
We seem to have lost you, Mike. You're frozen. Mike, can you hear us?
I was enjoying that as well.
I wasn't.
Okay. Mike, can you?
It's definitely frozen.
Yeah, definitely.
It's frozen in the 60s, I think.
Green, can you?
I could finish off for him, Mr. Mayor, if you want to.
I'm going to attempt to defer that.
Okay. No, I think we've got the gist of what Mike was saying. Otherwise, I think we'll be sitting here for the rest of the evening. If you keep going. Mike, can you hear us? No, I think we did give him a fair chance. Okay. We're now moving on to the seconder of the amendment, which was Councillor Anita Leach. Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to take up too much time here. I think a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but I think it's very rich of Councillor Green to blame the Labour government on the situation that COVID has caused. The budget position for Wirral. I'd just like to say that reiterate really that what everyone else has said is that, you know, we need to have opportunity for young people to be able to come into the council, and you know, with the having no increase since 2011 in the councillors' pay, I think does disbar people from actually coming into the council at a young age. So it's not a decision that the Labour group have taken lightly. It's something that, you know, we feel so strong about at this time with the pandemic and what people are suffering, that we believe that not having an increase in the basic allowance is what is right for us to do at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Anita. I don't think we've been able to get Councillor Sullivan back now, so I think we're going to have to move on in regard to that. Okay, so the guillotine anyway was at 9 o'clock, was it, or 9:30? Okay, there'll be no further speakers. I now move to the vote on the amendment. Okay, yes, it was 9 o'clock, the guillotine, so I have given people lots of opportunities there. So when called again, please turn on your camera and state clearly whether you are for, against, or wish to abstain. Okay. He's not. Mike Sullivan hadn't been responding. So okay. Can I ask Phil? Phil, can you roll of call again, please? Roll call of members.
Yes, of course, mate.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Berry.
For.
Councillor Bird.
For.
Councillor Brain.
For.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
For.
Councillor Cameron.
For.
Councillor Cannon.
For.
Councillor Carubia.
For.
Councillor Cleary.
Against.
Councillor Clements.
For.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cook.
Against.
Councillor Corkill.
For.
Councillor Cottier.
For.
Councillor Cox.
Abstain.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Fawkes.
For.
Councillor Frost.
For.
Councillor Gardner.
For.
Councillor Gilchrist.
For.
Councillor Powell Greeny.
For.
Councillor Jeff Green.
For.
Councillor Gray.
For.
Councillor Paul Hayes.
For.
Councillor Stephen Hayes.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
For.
Councillor Kathy Hodson.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
For.
Councillor Chris Jones.
For.
Councillor Sharon Jones.
For.
Councillor Tony Jones.
For.
Councillor Jordan.
For.
Councillor Kelly.
For.
Councillor Kenny.
For.
Councillor Leach.
For.
Councillor Lewis.
For.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Abstain.
Councillor McManus.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
For.
Councillor Muskrat.
4.
Councillor Nolan.
4.
Councillor Norbury.
4, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Povell.
4.
Councillor Rennie.
4.
Councillor Robinson.
4.
Councillor Rowlands.
4.
Councillor Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Spore.
4.
Councillor Spriggs.
4.
Councillor Stapleton.
4.
Councillor Stewart.
4.
Councillor Sullivan, just in case. No. Councillor Usher. Councillor Usher. Councillor Usher. No. Councillor Walsh.
4.
Councillor Whittingham.
4.
Councillor Irene Williams.
4.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
4.
Councillor Steve Williams.
4.
Councillor Williamson.
4.
Councillor Wood.
4.
And Councillor Wright.
4.
Thank you, members.
Okay, the voting was as follows. For 55, against 2, abstentions 3. So that amendment was carried. Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, if I may ask a question of the monitoring officer, please?
Yes, Ian, go ahead. Yes.
Through yourself, Mr. Mayor, could I request a copy of the voting list after this meeting, please, Mr. Monitoring Officer, showing how individual councillors voted on that, please?
If we have that information, Councillor Lewis, then absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like a list of names, please, of each individual member and whether they voted for, against or abstained or weren't present to vote, please.
Yes, they'll be on the lists of the Democratic Services officers.
Thank you.
I'll pass those on.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Okay, Phil, do I have to go back to is that being carried now? Yeah, that's been carried. So what do we?
So that takes you back to the original motion.
That was, but I moved and Councillor
Yes.
Davis seconded, yeah?
Yes, so that's now been amended to become the substantive. So that is now to be agreed, either by assent or by vote.
All right, could I ask members if we could agree that by assent?
Yes.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, Steve, I've got you've got your hand up, Steve Faggs. Steve.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Following on from comments by Councillor Lewis, and the technology has let a number of members down tonight. You know, we are in strange circumstances, but whilst we aren't taking any increase in our basic allowance, we do genuinely need the genuine equipment to be able to do our job. Now, some members seem to have more issues and problems. So my view is, can we ask the monitoring officer to investigate and look where those glitches are and try and get it better next time? No one should be denied democracy through the lack of technology.
Okay, I agree with you, Councillor Faggs. Yes, we certainly will do that.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor, we'll be straight on to that.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks a lot. Okay, so we agree that by assent, yeah? Yeah, okay. Right, we have come to the end of the meeting, I think. Yeah, we have, yes. Okay. Can I thank all the members and the officers? It is strange times. It's very, very difficult. The officers have put in a tremendous amount of work to get this up and going, really. And there has been a few difficulties. I had difficulties myself just getting on during the day even. So, you know, it is difficult. I know we all have the same kit and that, but for some reason, there does seem to be problems with my with my Wi-Fi, but I thought I had sorted it out this morning, but then later on there was a little bit difficult. But I'm sure Phil and the officers will look at the few little glitches that we did have. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance this evening. Thank you for your contributions, and remember, you know, please keep safe and look out for people who are less fortunate than ourselves. Okay, thank you very much.